Chapter 976. The ground in front of him was golden and emitted a strong aura of sharpness, like a divine sword being unsheathed. It was as if there were many sharp swords hidden inside, ready to break out of the ground. The aura of the metal attribute was extremely rich. Chu Mu's eyes were attracted because there were hundreds of metal elemental grasses growing on the golden ground. Hundreds of metal elemental grasses emitted a strong aura of sharpness that filled the surroundings, causing a layer of faint golden mist to appear above and around the metal elemental grasses. 100-year-old metal elemental grasses, 300-year-old, 500-year-old, 1,000-year-old metal elemental grasses. Chu Mu exclaimed. Among the hundreds of metal elemental grasses, the ones at the edge were 100-year-old metal elemental grasses. The closer to the center, the older the metal elemental grasses. Chu Mu found 1,000-year-old metal elemental grasses. When Chu Mu's gaze shifted to the center of the metal elemental grasses, he was stunned and his breathing became rapid. Excitement, the excitement of an alchemist. 9,000-year-old. Chu Mu's hands trembled slightly. Even a king-level expert would be excited when seeing a 9,000-year-old metal elemental grasses. As an alchemist grandmaster, Chu Mu looked at a 9,000-year-old metal elemental grasses that could be used to refine an earth-level pill. It was like a sword lover seeing a peerless sword. Metal elemental grasses between 100 and 1,000 years old were suitable for refining mortal-level pills. Metal elemental grasses between 1,000 and 10,000 years old were suitable for refining earth-level pills. A 9,000-year-old metal elemental grasses could be used to refine earth-level peak-tier pills. It was extremely valuable. Of course, a single metal elemental grasses could not be used to refine pills. Although he was excited, Chu Mu did not completely lose his mind. After calming down, doubts appeared in his mind. How could there be other metal elemental grasses growing next to a 9,000-year-old metal elemental grasses? Chu Mu could not help but ponder. The growth of trees required nutrient. It would be difficult for other trees to grow next to a huge tree because of the nutrient requirement. If they were separated, it would be difficult for other trees to grow. This was the law of nature. For example, if 10 people were to share a piece of cake for 2 people, they would definitely not be full. However, if this piece of cake was given to one person, then that person would be very full. Spirit herbs usually took a long time to grow and required a lot of nutrient. Therefore, the most suitable place for spirit herbs to grow was the spirit herb garden. However, there would be enough distance between each spirit herb, half a meter or a meter apart. Moreover, the soil of the spirit herb garden had to be high in nutrient. The growing environment of the metal elemental grass had a higher requirement than ordinary spiritual herbs. It needed a metal elemental land, which was a land with a certain density of metal elemental energy, to grow the metal elemental grass. The growth of the metal elemental grass would constantly rob the metal elemental land of the metal elemental land. This meant that it would be difficult for a second metal elemental grass to grow next to a metal elemental grass. The older the metal elemental grass, the more metal elemental energy it would absorb. Therefore, under normal circumstances, there would not be other metal elemental grasses growing next to a 9,000-year-old metal elemental grass. Even if there were other metal elemental grasses, their nutrients would be robbed by the 9,000-year-old metal elemental grass, and they would eventually wither and die. Chu Mu thought of a possibility which was the biggest possibility. His eyes suddenly lit up. Under this land of metal elemental grass, under this metal elemental land, there must be some kind of precious metal elemental treasure. It could also be imagined that the precious metal elemental treasure under this metal elemental land would definitely be more valuable than this 9,000-year-old metal elemental grass. After a burst of excitement, Chu Mu quickly calmed down. Just when he was about to pick the metal elemental grass, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. An extreme sense of crisis invaded his body, and he quickly dodged to the side. At the same time, a golden sword light pierced through the air, brushed past him, and hit the ground, shooting out a small finger-sized hole. Just when he steadied himself, another golden sword light pierced through the air, forcing Chu Mu to dodge again. Dodging again and again, he was getting further and further away from the metal elemental grass. Then, two figures descended from the sky, landing beside the 100 metal elemental grass. So many metal elemental grass. The middle-aged man in the fiery red long robe widened his eyes. That's 9,000-year-old metal elemental grass. The other middle-aged man in the golden long robe stared at Chu Mu, who was running away quickly. His eyes were extremely sharp, as if they could pierce through everything. The one who shot the sword light at Chu Mu just now was him. Both of them were Sword of Gojoseon. After Chu Mu made his judgment, he immediately retreated without hesitation. Even if the two of them were just ordinary Ichino Sword of Gojoseon, Chu Mu was not confident that he could fight them one-on-one. Not to mention, from the aura emitted from the two of them, he could vaguely tell that they were not Ichino Sword of Gojoseon. They were probably two-star or even Samsung Sword of Gojoseon, which was even more impossible for him to fight. The two Sword of Gojoseon did not chase after Chu Mu because of the metal elemental grass. In their eyes, a mere divine condensation realm swordsman was not worth mentioning. Of course, if they knew of Chu Mu's identity, they would definitely kill him at all costs to prevent him from taking revenge. Did Chu Mu really leave? Of course not. Whether it was the 9,000-year-old metal elemental grass or the metal elemental treasure buried under the metal elemental land, Chu Mu did not plan to let them go. After confirming that the two Sword of Gojoseon did not chase after him, Chu Mu stopped and began to use the divine desolate sword art. He was sure that the two Sword of Gojoseon were not higher than 3 stars. At most, they were 3 stars. When he used the Deshang's burning blood transformation, he could fight against and even kill the Ichino Sword of Gojoseon. When he used the divine desolate sword art and used the burning blood transformation, it would not be a problem to fight against the Samsung Sword of Gojoseon. It could catch them off guard and even have the effect of a surprise attack. As long as he killed one of them, Chu Mu was confident that he could fight against the other one. After comprehending the mysteries of creation, his understanding of the divine desolate sword art had deepened. The time it took to use it was shortened from 20 breaths to 15 breaths. After 15 breaths, Chu Mu successfully used the divine desolate sword art. He felt that all the sky desolate sword essence in his body had transformed into divine desolate sword essence. A powerful energy surged in his body, and it was extremely terrifying. Chu Mu tried his best to restrain his aura, but the divine desolate sword essence was extremely powerful and he was unable to completely restrain it. It was inevitable that a portion of it leaked out. Fortunately, it was not too strong and he was in the 5 elemental land, a place where the 5 elemental chi was extremely dense, so it was more or less covered up. Chu Mu was not in a hurry to approach. Instead, he tried his best to restrain his aura and hide his figure as he approached. He saw the two Sword of Gojoseon picking the metal elemental grass stalk by stalk. They had already picked more than half of the metal elemental grass. Even though they were picking the metal elemental grass, and were extremely excited to see the 9,000-year-old metal elemental grass, the two Sword of Gojoseon still maintained a high level of vigilance. Once there was any movement, they would immediately react. It was not that easy to sneak up on them. After using the divine desolate sword art, the sword essence would continue to be consumed. However, as long as he did not use any sword techniques, the consumption of sword essence would not be very fast. This also gave Chu Mu some time to hide and observe. He slowly concealed his figure and approached the other party, trying to get as close as possible. In an instant, Chu Mu used the Deshang's burning blood transformation, increasing his strength by 3 times. He rushed towards the two Sword of Gojoseon at full speed. The Sword of Gojoseon was unsheathed and turned into a sword light. It was extremely fast as it flew towards the fiery red-robed sword of Gojosian. He took out a top royal grade sword and directly used the grade 4 sword technique, Thundercloud Storm. A storm of dozens of meters instantly swept out. The aura of the 5 elements was swept up, making the Thundercloud Storm look even more fierce. In fact, this was the land of the 5 elements. Any profound energy that did not belong to the 5 elements would be weakened to a certain extent. However, the Thundercloud Storm in this state was still very strong, causing the 2 sword of Gojosian to be shocked. They were more worried about damaging the metal elemental grass that had not been picked yet. The fiery red-robed sword of Gojosian was also locked onto by the golden red sword light of the Imperial sword technique. He felt a little creeped out. The profound of metal and the profound of fire were even more powerful due to the amplification of the 5 elements. With the injection of the terrifying divine desolate sword essence, the power was even more tyrannical and could not be underestimated. Immediately after the Thundercloud Storm, Chu Mu immediately used the even more powerful sword technique, Clear Sky Breaking Through Clouds. A dark golden crescent moon slashed out. Clear Sky Breaking Through Clouds contained the profound of metal and was amplified by the 5 elements. The other profound of metal were weakened, but on the other hand, Clear Sky Breaking Through Clouds was even sharper. After breaking through the Thundercloud Storm, its power was even more tyrannical as it slashed towards the golden-robed sword of Gojosian. Humph, insignificant skill. The golden-robed sword of Gojosian sneered. He unsheathed his sword and directly used a sword technique. With a stab, the golden sword light immediately condensed into a huge sword and pierced towards the dark golden crescent moon with unparalleled power. This was an Earth Grade 4 sword technique. Its power was extremely terrifying. Chu Mu's eyes flashed with a silver light as he caught a trace of a trajectory and appeared on the body of the fiery red-robed sword of Gojosian. With a swing of his sword, the Void Sword technique, Void Scar, was used. Even though the profound meaning of space was weakened in the land of the 5 elements, as one of the highest profound meanings, it was already extremely powerful. The land of the 5 elements did not weaken it significantly, and with the amplification of the divine wilderness sword art and the large success of the burning blood transformation, its power and speed were terrifying to the extreme. Just as the fiery red-robed sword of Gojosian sent the sword of Gojosian flying, Void Scar had already broken through his protective sword aura as well as his saint-grade low-grade inner armor. Half of his chest was cut open. Under the inextinguishable sword intent, Void Scar's power was still present, destroying his internal organs. Immediately, the sword of Gojosian's internal organs were injured, causing blood to spurt out from his mouth. The sword of Gojosian spun in a circle, carrying the profound of metal, fire, and wind as it pierced through his neck. Profound and sword intent erupted, crushing the neck of the 2-star sword of Gojosian. In just an instant, the fiery red-robed sword of Gojosian had been killed by Chu Mu's sneak attack. The golden-robed sword of Gojosian was a Samsung sword of Gojosian, so his strength was many times stronger. With a single sword strike, he had seen his junior brother's death from the corner of his eyes. In his grief and indignation, he exploded with rage. Chapter 977. Disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion, you must die. The golden-robed Samsung sword of Gojosian was enraged. He recognized Chu Mu as a disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. Holding the sword with both hands, he slashed the sky. 100-meter-long golden sword condensed in the sky and then slashed down. The sky seemed to be split in half. Chu Mu immediately felt a peerless sharpness that wanted to split him in half. Even his soul was trembling. Earth Rank 4 Advanced Sword Skill. His body movement and sword skill erupted in an instant. The 9 revolutions sword intent and profound were displayed to the extreme. In an instant, he narrowly avoided the golden-robed sword of Gojosian's attack and attacked from the side. The sword of Gojosian also turned into a tricolored sword light and pierced towards the golden-robed sword of Gojosian. The golden-robed sword of Gojosian's anger subsided slightly. He was shocked to find that the person who suddenly attacked him and his junior brother was actually the god condensation realm swordsman he had chased away not long ago. He didn't know what kind of secret technique he had used to explode with such terrifying strength. Moreover, even his sword intent and profound had reached the 9 revolutions peak. He and Li Tao had different thoughts. Li Tao thought that Chu Mu had some kind of secret treasure that could raise his sword intent and profound to a whole new level, while the golden-robed sword of Gojosian thought that Chu Mu must have some kind of powerful secret technique that could raise his sword intent and profound to a whole new level. As for the idea that Chu Mu himself had the 9 revolutions peak sword intent and profound, it just flashed through his mind and was immediately ruled out. It was very simple. If Chu Mu really did have the 9 revolutions peak sword intent and profound, he would have been hidden away by the Flying Heaven Pavilion as a peerless treasure. They would have done everything they could to cultivate him in secret. Why would he come out to train alone? The golden-robed sword of Gojosian also felt that the Flying Heaven Pavilion definitely didn't have a secret technique that could raise his sword intent and profound to a whole new level. Otherwise, the Flying Heaven Pavilion would have dominated the West Tiger territory long ago. It should be this child's fortuitous encounter. Shocked, all kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind. The golden-robed sword of Gojosian's anger was once again reduced, and his desire to kill Chu Mu decreased sharply. This was because he wanted to capture Chu Mu alive and force him to reveal all kinds of secret technique. If he could cultivate them himself, his strength would definitely increase to an astonishing level. His killing intent had decreased sharply, and he wanted to capture Chu Mu alive. Naturally, he held back some of his power when he attacked. Chu Mu also keenly sensed that the pressure he was facing had decreased. The defensive sword art continued to attack from every angle. The defensive sword art that had fused with the ultimate 9 revolution undying sword intent and 3 ultimate 9 revolution profound meanings was extremely powerful. The wind profound meaning had been weakened, while the gold profound meaning and the fire profound meaning had been strengthened. Facing the defensive sword art, the golden-robed sword of Gojosian did not dare to underestimate it. His body shifted and dodged, creating layers of phantoms that were hard to distinguish. After circling around a few times, he attacked Chu Mu, intending to subdue Chu Mu in close combat and then capture him alive. However, he did not know that his intention to fight in close combat was exactly what Chu Mu wanted. The golden-robed sword of Gojosian possessed an Earth Rank 4 advanced sword art, which was extremely powerful. Chu Mu believed that it would be difficult for him to fight against it in his current state. However, once he got into close combat, that would be his strength. First, he pretended to be weak and constantly dodged, trying his best not to collide with the opponent's sword. Moreover, when dodging, he tried his best to hide his sorry state. This made the golden-robed sword of Gojosian feel that he had taken the right path and increased the power of his attacks. Sword after sword, each sword contained sword intent and the power of laws. Moreover, the power of laws contained in each sword was constantly changing, making each sword even more unpredictable. The swords connected, forming a crazy storm of attack. Chu Mu was in the middle of it, dodging left and right, pretending to be weak, creating an illusion that he was gradually unable to withstand it. The more powerful the secret technique, the greater the side effects. Let me see how long you can last. Once the secret technique's duration is up, you will become my prisoner. The golden-robed sword of Gojosian attacked crazily, using the power of laws of metal as the main force. Every sword was extremely sharp as he spoke, attacking Chu Mu verbally. Chu Mu revealed a trace of panic. The sword of no return fell to the ground and struggled a few times, but it did not fly up again. It seemed that the pressure was too great, and he could not even divert his attention to use the imperial sword art. The golden-robed sword of Gojosian attacked while paying attention to the movements around him. When he felt the sword of no return fall to the ground, he still maintained a high level of vigilance. However, unknowingly, he had relaxed a little. Our battle here has caused a huge commotion. Perhaps other king-level powerhouses will arrive soon, Chu Mu said with difficulty as he withstood the golden-robed sword of Gojosian's crazily attacking. Half of his current state was real because the pressure was too great, and the other half was fake. The golden-robed sword of Gojosian's heart shook. His sword strike was a little lacking in momentum. At the start, he was angry. He was angry that his junior apprentice brother had been killed by a sneak attack. Then, he was shocked, and then he was overjoyed. He had wholeheartedly wanted to capture Chu Mu alive and force him to reveal the Flying Heaven Pavilion's imperial sword art and other secret skills. He hadn't considered anything else. Now that he heard Chu Mu's words, he realized that some time had passed since the battle began. And during the battle, the power of sword intent and rules had erupted. The fluctuations were obvious. If other king-level powerhouses passed by, they might come over to take a look. At that time, the situation would be disadvantageous to him. As soon as this thought appeared, the golden-robed sword of Gojosian's sword hesitated for a moment. "I know your goal. You want to capture me alive. You want my secret skills." Chu Mu continued to speak, trying to disrupt the golden-robed sword of Gojosian's train of thought. "Do you know who I am?" Without giving the golden-robed sword of Gojosian time to respond, Chu Mu continued to say, "My name is Chu Mu. I am the number 1 disciple on the Good Fortune Heaven tablet this time." As soon as these words came out, the golden-robed sword of Gojosian's spiritual world felt as if a powerful bolt of lightning had struck him. It tore through the air, rumbling and shaking him until he felt a little dizzy. A disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion, the number 1 disciple on the Good Fortune Heaven tablet, he had already guessed Lin Ming's identity. But the latter identity was like a bolt from the heavens. In that instant, the sword in his hand paused. He couldn't say what he was thinking, but in short, his sword had paused for a moment. Then, he slashed down again without hesitation. But the power behind it was clearly inferior to before. What Chu Mu wanted was this opportunity, this momentary opportunity. The undying sword intent fused together with 3 different profound meanings. He blocked with his sword. A tyrannical strength rushed out, causing Chu Mu's figure to sway backwards. But his body was like a willow swaying in the wind, instantly rebounding and counterattacking. Defensive counterattack sword skill, cloud-breaking flash. The dark golden sword light pierced through the air, shooting towards the golden-robed sword of Gojosian. At the same time, the sword of no return that had fallen to the ground flew up once more, condensing a tricolored sword light. With the fastest speed possible, it shot towards the back of the golden-robed sword of Gojosian's head. Chu Mu's counterattack was swift and fierce. It was so sudden and so swift that it surpassed the golden-robed sword of Gojosian's expectations. The golden-robed sword of Gojosian's reaction was also extremely fast. He used his footwork and rapidly moved away, avoiding Chu Mu's defensive counterattack sword skill, cloud-breaking flash. At the same time, he spun around and blocked the sword of no return. A faintly discernible trajectory flickered on the golden-robed sword of Gojosian's body. Chu Mu's sword slashed out using Void Scar. It was very close, and Void Scar was silent and extremely fast. Just as the golden-robed sword of Gojosian sensed it, his protective sword aura had already been broken. His golden robe was unable to block it, and his low-grade saint-grade inner armor was also cut open. His waist was heavily injured, and his flesh and organs around the wound had all disappeared, as if they had evaporated. The intense pain caused the golden-robed sword of Gojosian's body to tremble. He used the imperial sword technique, and Chu Mu's sword stabbed out from another blind spot. The inextinguishable sword intent continuously attacked the golden-robed sword of Gojoseon's wound, causing waves of intense pain to spread throughout his body. Chu Mu used all his strength to counterattack. His sword was incomparably violent, causing the golden-robed sword of Gojoseon to be injured once again. His left arm was chopped off, and his strength was greatly reduced. After 3 sword strikes, his head was chopped off and flew high into the air. Without any hesitation, he immediately used the Slaughter Divine Weapon and Heaven Seizing Great Technique to absorb the negative energy and cultivation talent. He also took the golden-robed sword of Gojoseon's sword and spatial ring. The golden-robed sword of Gojoseon did not let the golden-robed sword of Gojoseon go either. After that, Chu Mu immediately began to pluck the metal elemental grass. His speed was extremely fast, and he plucked stalk after stalk. With the divine desolate sword art and Deshang's burning blood transformation, his speed was many times faster than usual. His hands could not be seen at all. He could only pluck stalk after stalk of metal elemental grass and store them into his spatial ring. In the blink of an eye, he had also plucked the 9,000-year-old metal elemental grass. After plucking all the metal elemental grass, Chu Mu did not stop and immediately began to dig out the metal elemental ground. Because of the power of metal, the metal elemental ground was extremely hard, comparable to metal. It was not easy to dig it out. The previous sword had been corroded by the divine desolate sword essence and was rusty and damaged. Chu Mu had no choice but to take out a new royal grade sword as a digging tool. Under the peak of the 9th revolution indestructible sword intent and various profoundness, as well as the divine desolate sword essence, the royal grade sword was incomparably sharp. It constantly dug out the hard metal elemental ground. 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters. As it dug deeper, the power of metal emitted became stronger and sharper. In the end, even the sword of no return joined in the digging under Chu Mu's command, increasing the efficiency by another step. After digging for about 8 meters, the sword came into contact with a hard object. The sword trembled violently and almost flew out of his hand. Chu Mu hurriedly dissipated the recoil and began to dig at the edge. After a while, the outline of a piece of metal ore appeared in front of him. He constantly cleaned up the metal elemental ground soil, causing the piece of metal ore to protrude even more. He kept the sword and grabbed a corner of the metal ore with both hands. With a burst of strength, he forcefully pulled the piece of metal ore out of the ground. This was a piece of metal ore that was pure gold in color. It had an irregular shape and was about the size of a millstone. However, it weighed tens of thousands of kilograms. Chu Mu revealed a look of ecstasy and hurriedly kept the pure gold metal ore into his spatial ring. After the metal ore was dug out, the power of metal in the metal elemental ground weakened by a lot. It seemed that this piece of pure gold metal ore was the treasure of this metal elemental ground. After keeping it, Chu Mu hurriedly left. Just as he left, a figure landed. Chapter 978. Golden Patterned Silver Sword Robe. His eyebrows were slender and sharp. His eyes contained an astonishing sharpness. In the depths of his pupils, there seemed to be a faint golden glow. The moment this person landed, his gaze swept past the 2 corpses and focused on the excavated metal elemental ground. He looked carefully and sensed the aura fluctuations within. What a rich power of metal! This is the remnant aura of the celestial metal. This sword of Gojoseon immediately identified the metal ore hidden in the metal elemental ground. The golden glow in the depths of his pupils became rich and filled his entire pupils, turning them into a pure gold color. Sensing the remnant aura fluctuations and sensing Chu Mu's aura, he understood that if the person who was leaving quickly did not hide his strength, he would definitely not be a match for him, a 4-star sword of Gojoseon. He had already made an appointment with a Grandmaster swordsmith in the sword sect to forge an even stronger saint-level sword, a pure metal elemental sword. as he mainly cultivated the laws of metal. All of his sword techniques were also based on the metal elemental. Now, he was lacking a metal elemental ore of a sufficient grade. The celestial metal was a pure metal ore that did not contain any other element. It was suitable for forging saint-level swords. Judging from the shape of the excavated ground and the remnant aura fluctuations, this piece of celestial metal was definitely not small. It could be forged into a very powerful metal elemental sword. Ignoring the two corpses, this sword of Gojosian once again soared into the air. With an extremely fast speed, he chased after Chu Mu. The speed of the four-star sword of Gojosian of the sky-splitting sword sect was not to be underestimated. In a flash, he disappeared into the horizon. Under the divine desolate sword technique and Deshang's burning blood transformation state, the imperial sword technique and the profound meaning of space were combined. The mountain-trembling energy caused a portion of his muscles to vibrate at a high frequency, producing an even stronger driving force. This caused Chu Mu's speed to reach an unprecedented peak. This state could not be maintained for long. After barely holding on for 15 minutes, Chu Mu quickly stopped the divine desolate sword art and Deshang's burning blood transformation. He took out a blood yang pill and consumed it. He also took out many high-grade origin crystals and crushed them to absorb them. He stopped the imperial sword technique and quickly descended. He broke open a secret area and dug out a temporary cave. He waved his hands and laid down all sorts of seals. The outermost seals isolated the aura. After doing all this, Chu Mu could finally rest at ease and focus on recovering his blood essence and sword origin. This time, he had consumed more blood essence than before. A few blood yang pills were not enough to replenish his blood essence, so he had to take a few more. His sword origin was almost used up, and he almost had to use the soul-devouring secret method. However, once he used it, the heaven-earth yuan qi within a radius of 10,000 meters would cause a huge commotion. It might attract powerful enemies, which would be disadvantageous to him. It was better for him to stay in the cave and recover. Chu Mu did not know that he was being targeted by a 4-star sword of Gojosian from the sky-splitting sword sect. The 4-star sword of Gojosian was extremely powerful. Compared to the Samsung sword of Gojosian that he had killed before, it was many times stronger. It was not something that he could fight against right now. The metal-grade sword of Gojosian chased after Chu Mu's remaining aura and suddenly stopped in midair. This was because Chu Mu's aura had suddenly become very weak here. The golden color spread to his pupils, and golden light shot out from his eyes. The metal-grade sword of Gojosian's eyesight doubled. He carefully scanned the surroundings and then looked down. At the same time, his divine sense poured out like a tide and covered the area below. He searched carefully, not missing a single spot. The aura had become very weak here, and there were no fluctuations in the aura in front of him. This meant that the person he was chasing should be nearby. He had restrained his aura and concealed himself. Could it be that he has discovered my tracking? The metal-grade sword of Gojosian guessed. Then, he shook his head. The aura has suddenly become weak and somewhat unstable. Either he has used some kind of secret method and the secret method has stopped. His strength has greatly decreased, or he has been severely injured. He recalled the two corpses. The remaining aura told him that they were the 2-star sword of Gojosian and the Samsung sword of Gojosian. No matter which guess it was possible. The celestial metal was definitely in the hands of that person. After searching once, he didn't find anything. It was as if the person had evaporated and disappeared without a trace. The metal-grade sword of Gojosian didn't believe it and searched again. After searching 3 times, he still didn't find anything. This didn't make him give up. Instead, it made him suspicious and increased the intensity of his search. After searching 2 more times, the metal-grade sword of Gojosian frowned. He thought for a while and eliminated the possibilities one by one. Then, he locked onto a spot. His figure flashed, and he appeared in front of the spot he suspected. Very high attainments in sealing. If I was a little impatient, I would have missed it. The metal-grade sword of Gojosian stared at the concealed seal and secretly sneered. Using his finger like a sword, a dazzling golden light condensed and shot out. The golden sword light tore through the air and instantly destroyed the seal. This seal's aura concealment was outstanding, but it definitely couldn't block the attack of a powerful 4-star sword of Gojosian. Especially a sword of Gojosian from one of the 5 major factions. His strength was much stronger than an ordinary sword of Gojosian. The moment the seal was broken, Chu Mu sensed something. His closed eyes instantly opened and shot out a sharp light. He saw the figure outside the cave. The time was too short, and his sword energy and essence blood had yet to fully recover. The aura that the figure emitted shocked Chu Mu. He knew that he wasn't a match for him. Even if he used the divine desolate sword art and Deshang's burning blood transformation, he still wouldn't be able to resist. Chu Mu's heart sank. He never expected that he would provoke such an expert. I only want the celestial metal in your hands. The metal-grade sword of Gojosian stood outside the cave. After he broke the seal, he could see everything inside the cave. His gaze fell on Chu Mu's face. He could tell at a glance that Chu Mu hadn't recovered yet. Moreover, he was only a divine condensation realm swordsman. Perhaps he had used some powerful trump card to kill the 2-sword of Gojosian, and not some secret technique. This was because he couldn't believe that there was a secret technique that could allow a divine condensation realm swordsman to surpass such a large level and kill a 2-star sword of Gojosian and a Samsung sword of Gojosian. Even the sky-splitting sword sect didn't have such a secret technique. The other 4 major factions didn't have it either. Therefore, there was only one explanation. It was a trump card. Activating such a trump card required energy. This was why Chu Mu looked like he was drained of blood and his face was pale. Facing an opponent that he couldn't fight, Chu Mu wasn't stupid enough to stall for time. That would be disadvantageous to him. Therefore, even though it pained him, he still directly activated one of the 3 heavenly desolate sword intents left in his spiritual world. In an instant, the metal-grade sword of Gojosian felt his hair stand on end. His soul trembled. It wasn't voluntary, but he couldn't help but tremble. Saint level attribute. Sword intent. The metal-grade sword of Gojosian's expression changed greatly. He was extremely shocked as he cried out involuntarily. When a swordsman broke through to the divine condensation realm, he would condense a sword's soul. When he became the sword of Gojosian, his sword intent would transform into a king-level sword intent, which was even more powerful than a divine condensation realm sword intent. Compared to a king-level sword intent, a divine condensation realm sword intent was a qualitative improvement. When one became a sword saint, the sword intent would also transform into a saint-level sword intent. When a saint-level sword intent was compared to a king-level sword intent, it was also a qualitative improvement. A saint-level sword intent was much more powerful than a king-level sword intent. A saint-level sword intent with an attribute was much more powerful than an ordinary saint-level sword intent. Leaving a sword intent in someone else's spiritual world was the method of a saint-level expert. Moreover, it wasn't an ordinary saint-level expert. It was very likely that it was a mid-level saint-level expert. In addition, leaving an elemental sword intent in someone else's spiritual world as a trump card would cost that saint-level powerhouse a little. Therefore, unless it was someone he really valued, a saint-level powerhouse would never do something that would harm himself and benefit others. The metallic sword of Gojosian trembled under the lock of the heavenly wasteland's sword intent. He was also very hesitant and frightened. This meant that Chu Mu was valued by a mid-level or even higher sword saint. If he killed him, it was very likely that he would provoke the revenge of that powerful sword saint. At that time, Even the sky-splitting sword sect might not be able to protect him. Moreover, he felt that the sword intent that had locked onto him was almost draining his life force. It was as if his life force was being eroded. It was very uncomfortable. He knew that if his opponent released that sword intent with an attribute of a saint-level sword intent, it was unknown whether he could dodge it. Fighting with his life, cold sweat immediately seeped out of his forehead and flowed down. "I don't want to waste this sword intent." Chu-Mu opened his mouth and said indifferently, "Get away immediately." There was no discussion and his attitude was extremely tough. This caused the metallic sword of Gojoseon to be very angry, but he did not dare to act rashly. He raised his spirit and strength and retreated step by step. Chu-Mu, on the other hand, advanced step by step. The heavenly wasteland sword intent was still locked onto the metallic sword of Gojoseon, not giving him the slightest chance to attack. Chu-Mu walked out of the cave. The metallic sword of Gojoseon gradually rose into the air. Under the lock of the heavenly wasteland sword intent, his every movement was very difficult and required a lot of strength. Coldly staring at Chu-Mu, the metallic sword of Gojoseon hesitated in his heart. In the end, he decided to leave. Although the celestial metal was good and he really needed it, if he offended a mid-level sword saint because of this, the consequences would be very serious. He might even lose his life. He did not think that his life could be compared to a mere piece of celestial metal. However, he remembered Chu-Mu, firmly remembered him. Turning around, he flew into the sky and quickly left. Chu-Mu maintained a high level of vigilance and also released the heavenly wasteland sword intent hundreds of meters away. After dozens of breaths, the metallic sword of Gojoseon did not appear again. There was also not the slightest fluctuation of aura. Chu-Mu hurriedly withdrew the heavenly wasteland sword intent, operated the hidden edge technique and concealed all his aura. He drilled into the dense forest and quickly left. He also secretly breathed a sigh of relief and wiped away his cold sweat. It was not a good deal to use a heavenly wasteland sword intent to kill a sword of Gojoseon. Fortunately, the sword of Gojoseon had retreated. Otherwise, if he were to erupt with all his strength, the consequences would really be unimaginable. Chu-Mu also realized that although he had the heavenly wasteland sword intent, but in the face of a strong enemy, the heavenly wasteland sword intent was not omnipotent. In the end, his strength was still too low. Therefore, increasing his strength was the right way. Moving quickly, Chu-Mu once again opened up a temporary cave in a secret place. He laid down layers of seals and drilled in, beginning to restore his sword origin and essence blood. Chapter 979. The two-star sword of Gojoseon and the Samsung sword of Gojoseon's spatial rings did not have much collection, but it still increased Chu-Mu's upper-grade Yuanjing by quite a lot. The land of 5 elements was full of treasures. As he walked, he could find treasures related to the 5 elements. As long as it was valuable, Chu-Mu would not let it go. As he walked forward, he unknowingly approached the center of the land of 5 elements. Although the land of 5 elements was not small, 3 months was enough for the swordsman to walk around the land of 5 elements once. The deeper they went into the land of 5 elements, the older the 5 elements' spiritual grass they found. Chu-Mu picked a 1,000-year-old fire elemental grass and put it into his spatial ring. Suddenly, he felt that something was not right. As for how unusual it was, Chu-Mu couldn't describe it. It was just a feeling, a pure feeling that made him raise his guard. He released his divine remembrance and carefully sensed the surroundings. However, he didn't catch any abnormal fluctuations. Quiet, it was too quiet. Although there did not seem to be any ferocious beasts living in the land of 5 elements, it was too quiet now. Moreover, there was a feeling of depression like the depression before a storm. Suddenly, like a storm, the 5 elements' chi in the land of 5 elements fluctuated and turned into a flowing wind. Then, it turned into a storm, crazily sweeping. It was like an endless tide, wave after wave, surging towards the center of the land of 5 elements. It was as if a terrifying strange beast had awakened in the center of the land of 5 elements and wanted to absorb all the power of the land of 5 elements. Gold, green, blue, red, and brown storms of 5 colors swept towards the center from all directions. Each storm of 5 colors was a type of 5 elements chi in the land of 5 elements, corresponding to metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The sudden change alarmed all the swordsmen who entered the land of 5 elements. Most of the swordsmen did not know what was going on and were shocked by the sudden change. A few swordsmen were startled at first, but after feeling the changes in the surrounding chi, they all showed joy. Finally, I have waited for this opportunity. Great, the 5 elements sacred fruit is about to appear. It must be mine. 5 elemental sacred fruit, I've been waiting for you for so long. The eyes of the powerful sword of Gojoseon glowed sharply as they spoke. They immediately set off for the center of the land of 5 element. The 5 elemental land had its own rules. Experts above the king level couldn't enter. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to get a share of the 5 elemental sacred fruit. For a time, the wind blew and the clouds surged. Countless swordsmen set the center of the 5 elemental land as their goal and headed towards it. Chumu also realized that with such a huge commotion, it meant that some peerless treasure was about to appear. He didn't dare to have extravagant hopes of obtaining it, but he could still try his luck and experience it. He quickly moved, following the direction of the 5 elemental chi. The closer he got to the center of the 5 elemental land, the stronger the storm formed by the 5 elemental chi became. It was as if it was going to sweep Chu-Mu into the air and tear his body apart. Chu-Mu also saw that some of the 5 elemental aura storm had their 5 elemental power rapidly extracted and absorbed into the 5 elemental aura storm, causing the storm to become increasingly powerful. As for those spirit herbs, they rapidly withered due to the loss of power. Under the storm's onslaught, they were reduced to ashes. Chumu was shocked. Those spirit medicines were all over 1,000 years old. Yet, in a short 3 breaths of time, they had all turned into ashes. As the 5 elemental chi storm grew stronger and stronger, Chumu didn't dare to get too close. He carefully avoided the storm and advanced. 2 hours later, Chumu stopped. He was stunned by the scene in front of him. 5 different phenomena. A huge golden aura, like a heavenly sword, floated in the air. It rose and fell, emitting an incomparably shocking sharpness. It was surrounded by a dense golden light, which was a little illusory. Looking at the huge golden aura, Chu-Mu felt that it was dazzling, as if his eyes were about to be pierced. The second was a huge towering tree with luxuriant branches and leaves. It released an incomparably dense vitality. The third was a long river of water. It flowed in the air without a beginning or end. Traces of gentleness rippled out, but it also contained an unbreakable tenacity. The fourth was a huge ball of blazing flames. It was dozens of meters above the ground, floating in the air. It released a terrifyingly high temperature. It was bright red like a blazing sun. It wanted to burn everything close to it into nothingness. The fifth was a yellow-brown mountain. It stood tall on the ground, steady and heavy. It had existed since ancient times and would never change. Like Chu-Mu, the other swordsmen were all stunned when they saw this scene. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth. These are the 5 elemental signs of the 5 elemental lands. The 5 elemental saint fruit will appear here, muttered the sword of Gojoseon, who had studied the 5 elemental lands. The 5 elemental signs had the earth sign in the center, the metal sign, the wood sign, the water sign, and the fire sign. They were distributed in an orderly manner, guarding the 4 directions. The 5 elemental chi storm from all over the 5 elemental lands surged into the 5 elemental signs. The golden storm surged into the metal sign. The huge golden aura fluctuated as if it was absorbing nutrients. The terrifying sharpness became even more intense. When one's gaze fell on it, one would feel as if their eyes were being pierced. It was painful. After the wood sign absorbed the wood elemental chi storm, its vitality became even denser. After the water sign absorbed the water elemental chi storm, its gentleness and tenacity became even stronger. Similarly, after the fire sign absorbed the fire elemental chi storm, the temperature it released became higher and higher. The dancing flames became more and more intense. After the earth sign absorbed the earth sign, it became heavier and heavier, as if it was guarding the entire 5 elemental lands. The 5 elemental chi continued to surge into the 5 elemental signs. Chu Mu and the other swordsmen all hid and watched attentively. About an hour later, the last 5 elemental chi storm entered the 5 elemental signs, and the next change occurred. A golden light shot out from the metal sign into the water sign. The metal sign's power began to pour into the water sign, and the water sign also shot out a blue light into the wood sign. The wood sign also shot out a green light into the fire sign, and finally, the fire sign shot out a red light into the earth sign. The earth sign began to release a layer of yellowish-brown light. As it fluctuated, it flashed rhythmically. A tyrannical aura flowed from the earth sign to the top and converged. At the top of the earth sign, a tender sprout broke out of the ground. The powerful sword of Gojoseon, who coveted the 5 elemental sacred fruits, all locked their gazes on the tender sprout at the top of the earth sign. As the power of the aspect of earth continued to pour in, the sprout also continued to absorb wave after wave of power, and began to slowly grow. First, it slowly grew until it was about 30 centimeters tall. Then, it spat out a branch from which a leaf grew. The leaf was golden and gave off dense metal energy fluctuations. Soon after, the second leaf grew out. It was green and exuded a vigorous life force. It was the aura of the power of wood. The leaves gave off water energy fluctuations, the leaves gave off fire energy fluctuations, and the leaves gave off earth energy fluctuations. After 5 elemental leaves appeared on the branch, the sprout continued to grow. After another 30 centimeters, it sprouted another branch in a different direction from the first branch. Following this, it continuously absorbed the earth sign's power and slowly grew another 5 elemental leaves. The sapling grew 1 foot at a time. When the 5th branch grew out, it grew out 5 leaves of the 5 elements. The sapling was fully grown. At the very top of the seedling, waves of energy were gathering, from subtle to dense, increasing bit by bit. The outline of a fruit was forming, and it was slowly growing. The powerful sword of Gojoseon, who had come for the 5 elements' holy fruit, all held their breaths as they stared at the slowly growing fruit at the top of the 5 elements tree. They were ready to attack at any moment. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that the fruit that was about to grow was extraordinary. It was definitely a rare treasure. Everyone was excited, especially the kings. They were all ready to attack and get a share of the loot. Chu Mu knew his own limit. Although the rare treasure that was about to appear was very good, and he was very tempted, the problem was that with so many kings present, there was no way he could snatch it. If he attacked, he would most likely become cannon fodder. Instead of racking his brains to try and snatch the fruit that was about to mature, it was better to focus on other aspects, such as the 5 elements sign. He felt that he could learn something from it. Time passed bit by bit. Due to the absorption of the 5 elemental aura, the color of the 5 elemental aura faded a lot. The aura of the 5 elemental aura also weakened a lot. On the other hand, the aura of the 5 elemental aura continued to grow stronger and stronger. Without a doubt, the growth of the 5 elements' holy fruit took a lot of time and energy. Without enough energy, the 5 elements' holy fruit could not mature. An unripe 5 elements' holy fruit was worthless. Fortunately, the 5 elements' ground had been hidden in the void for many years. It had accumulated enough 5 elements' power to mature the 5 elements' holy fruit. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, 6 hours had passed. Every sword of Gojosian showed enough patience as they waited for the 5 elements' holy fruit to mature. As they continued to absorb energy, the 5 elements' holy fruit had basically taken shape. It had grown into a round shape the size of a quail's egg. There were 5 colors on it, and it emitted 5 elements' aura. "It's about to mature," the kings all said to themselves. They could not help but feel excited. The sword essence within the kings' bodies began to flow. Sword mind and all sorts of rule powers were stirred up, ready to explode at any moment. Chapter 980. Another 2 hours passed. Every sword of Gojosian was on high alert during this time. The 5 elemental sacred fruit suddenly erupted with extremely dense pulses of 5 elemental force. It swept out like a flood, forming a ring of 5 different colors. It spread across a radius of over 100,000 meters, allowing everyone to sense the terrifyingly dense pulses of 5 elemental force. In an instant, the 5 elements profound and 5 elements rules in every sword cultivator's spiritual world began to vibrate violently. It almost broke out of their spiritual world. They were so frightened that they hurriedly used their divine sense to suppress it. The 5 elements' sacred fruit has ripened. Go! In an instant, the sword of Gojosian all exploded with a powerful aura. Their speed reached the limit in an instant. They turned into streaks of light that shot toward the 5 elements' sacred fruit. These sword of Gojosian all had their eyes on the 5 elements' sacred fruit. They wanted to take it. This was because they knew the effects of the 5 elements' sacred fruit. If they didn't know, they wouldn't have taken action immediately. This was the first time Chu Mu had heard of the 5 elements' sacred fruit. In the memories of the alchemy grandmaster he had inherited, there was no mention of it. Therefore, he didn't know what the 5 elements' sacred fruit was used for. He could only be sure of one thing, and that was that the 5 elements' sacred fruit was extremely precious. Otherwise, it wouldn't have attracted so many sword of Gojosian to fight over it. In fact, just by looking at the way the 5 elements' sacred fruit appeared, one could tell how difficult it was to obtain it. Not all the sword of Gojosian elites took action immediately. A small number of powerful sword of Gojosian didn't take action. It seemed like they didn't want to take action, but that wasn't the case. They really did want the 5 elements' sacred fruit, but they didn't let their greed get to their heads. They decided to wait and see. Their instincts told them that the 5 elements' sacred fruit wouldn't be easy to obtain. As expected, the king-class experts who were rushing towards the 5 elements' sacred fruit were attacked. What was attacking these experts of the sword of Gojosian were not humans, but the elements of metal, wood, water, and fire. The golden figure trembled, and like a golden sword, it slashed out rays of golden sword light. Each ray of golden sword light contained an incomparably terrifying power. It was like an earth-grade sword skill that attacked the sword of Gojosian. This golden sword of Gojosian contained the law of gold, and it was a very high-level law of gold. In a situation where only one power was used, the sharpness of the golden sword of Gojosian was displayed to the extreme, causing the faces of the sword of Gojosian to change drastically. Several low-level sword of Gojosian, who couldn't dodge in time, were hit by the golden sword aura in an instant. The protective sword aura on their bodies was instantly broken, and their robes were torn apart. Their inner armor couldn't withstand the attack, and they were instantly killed. The mid-level sword of Gojosian were faster, more agile, and more powerful. They either dodged or took the attack head-on, so they weren't killed by the golden sword of Gojosian. On the giant tree of the element of wood, the branches seemed to come alive. They suddenly grew longer and lashed out from afar. They were like terrifying whips that could tear the void apart. The lashing power of the branches was terrifying. The low-level sword of Gojosian couldn't withstand it at all. They couldn't even dodge. They were instantly hit, and as their bodies trembled, their skin and hair quickly withered. It was as if their life force was being sucked out of them. The river of the element of water suddenly expanded. It was like the water of the Milky Way from the 9 heavens pouring down. In an instant, the low-level sword of Gojosian was drowned and died. Only the mid-level sword of Gojosian was able to withstand it for a while. On the other hand, the element of fire burst out with balls of flame. As it sprayed out, any low-level sword of Gojosian that was hit by it would be burned to ashes within 3 breaths. No one expected the 4 elements to attack. In an instant, hundreds of low-level sword of Gojosian were killed, and dozens of mid-level sword of Gojosian were injured. Only the high-level sword of Gojosian were strong enough. They avoided the attacks of the 4 elements and rushed toward the 5 elements' sacred fruit. Suddenly, a tyrannical power burst out from the element of earth and hit the high-level sword of Gojosian. The power couldn't be avoided, and it made their bodies sink. They almost fell. Raising their power to stabilize themselves, the high-level sword of Gojosian became more vigilant and accelerated toward the 5 elements' sacred fruit. Suddenly, changes occurred again. The element of metal, element of wood, element of water, and element of fire all moved and rushed toward the element of earth. The mountain of the element of earth trembled violently and left the ground of the 5 elements. The 5 elements' sacred fruit on top of it automatically sank into the element of earth. The high-level sword of Gojosian avoided the attacks of the 4 elements. The 4 elements landed on the element of earth, and incredible changes began to occur. The aspect of earth was the torso, while the aspect of wood and the aspect of earth fused together to form a pair of arms. It was as if he had put on a green armor with countless branches and leaves entwined around it. The aspect of fire landed above the aspect of earth, and turned into a flaming head that burned fiercely. The aspect of water landed below the aspect of earth, and turned into a blue vortex as it flowed. The aspect of metal circled around and turned into a golden sword that landed on one of his arms, which he held tightly. It seemed like a long time, but it also seemed like an instant. The 5 elements changed and condensed into a giant. It had no legs, but it was replaced by a vortex formed by the element of water. The element of fire had a head, the element of wood had 2 arms, the element of earth had a torso, the element of water had a lower body, and the element of metal had a weapon. They formed a unique 5 elements giant. The 5 elements war emperor has appeared. The few powerful sword of Gojosian who had yet to make a move said to themselves, "The 5 elements war emperor is extremely strong. He is even more difficult to deal with than the 9-star sword of Gojosian. However, only by defeating the 5 elements war emperor can we obtain the 5 elements sacred fruit." At this time, the high-level sword of Gojosian all attacked the 5 elements war emperor. For a moment, the earth-grade sword skills released a terrifying power. It was as if the sun was hanging high in the sky, as if a river was flowing, as if a giant tree was holding up the sky, as if a mountain was pressing down. All kinds of powerful sword skills bombarded the enormous body of the 5 elements war emperor, but they did not cause any damage to him. From the sword of Gojosian attacking, to the deaths of the low-level sword of Gojosian, to the injuries of the mid-level sword of Gojosian, to the appearance of the 5 elements war emperor, Chu Mu stared intently. When he saw the sword skills released by the high-level sword of Gojosian, he knew that he would be reduced to ashes if he was even slightly grazed by them. However, such powerful sword skills could not hurt the 5 elements war emperor at all. The 5 elements battle emperor retaliated by slashing out with his giant golden sword. Chu Mu's senses were sharper than some of the sword of Gojosian's. He immediately sensed the flow of energy from the 5 elements war emperor's body. The energy flowed from the golden sword to the lower body of the water god. The lower body of the water god flowed into the form of wood, then into the form of fire, then into the form of earth, and finally into the golden sword. In an instant it was as if the heavens and the earth were being split apart. A pure gold color stood in the air, traversing across the sky. An advanced sword of Gojosian was struck directly, unable to resist at all. Under this sword, it was directly killed. The other advanced sword of Gojosian's faces changed drastically, and fear appeared in their eyes. The power of such a sword was so terrifying that it could instantly kill an advanced sword of Gojosian. It was too terrifying. Even the powerful sword of Gojosian, who had yet to make a move, had a serious look on their faces. Such a sword was a threat to their safety. Chu Mu's eyes widened in shock. He could see and feel the power of the 5 Elements War Emperor's sword and the way it was unleashed. Strictly speaking, that sword was a sword skill, and it was an Earth Grade 5 Earth Grade sword skill. As everyone knew, the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth were mutually reinforcing and restraining each other. Metal gave birth to water, water gave birth to wood gave birth to fire, fire gave birth to earth, and earth gave birth to metal. In fact, Chu Mu wasn't the only one who had seen the form of that sword skill. Metal gave birth to water, water gave birth to wood gave birth to fire, fire gave birth to earth, and earth gave birth to metal. After completing a cycle, the power of metal was amplified to a terrifying extent. Of course, being able to see it clearly didn't mean that one could understand the mystery behind it, and it didn't mean that one could master such a sword skill. The reason was simple. It was like looking at the sun and knowing that the sun would emit terrifying heat, but not being able to emit the same kind of heat as the sun. However, it was undeniable that the 5 Elements War Emperor's sword skill had left an incomparably deep impression in Chu Mu's heart. Once again, he released a tyrannical sword of Gojosian and attacked with all his might. However, the attacks of the advanced sword of Gojosian couldn't do anything to the 5 Elements War Emperor. Instead, the 5 Elements War Emperor's counterattack killed another 2 advanced sword of Gojosian. The remaining advanced sword of Gojosian's faces turned ugly. They immediately understood that with their strength, it was impossible for them to obtain the 5 Elements sacred fruit. If they continued to fight, it was highly likely that they would all be killed by the 5 Elements War Emperor. At this point, the advanced sword of Gojosian had no choice but to use a speed faster than the 5 Elements War Emperor to escape. At this moment, the few extremely powerful sword of Gojosian that were hiding in the shadows appeared one after another. They were distributed around the 5 Elements War Emperor, and there were exactly 5 of them. Among the 5 of them, there were 3 men and 2 women. They were dressed differently, but the aura they exuded was extremely tyrannical. Senior Brother Qin. Seeing one of the 5 people, Chu Mu was stunned. That person was Qin Tianyi, who had once given him a piece of sky ginger. As for the other 2 men, one of them was wearing a moon-white robe with silver edges. His long hair draped over his shoulders. His handsome face was calm, as if he wouldn't be surprised even if the sky fell and the earth cracked. His pair of clear eyes flashed with sharpness from time to time. The other man was dressed in a long black robe. His bald head could almost be used as a mirror. He had a similarly handsome face, but there was always a smile hanging on his face. It was a somewhat evil smile. His pair of pitch-black eyes seemed to have 2 demons lurking within. As for the 2 women, one of them was wearing a short purple muslin robe that fully accentuated her graceful figure. She had a head of light purple hair that went past her ears. Her eyebrows and eyes were shadowed. Her beautiful red lips gave her a sense of wildness. There were many different colored bracelets on her arms. Not only did they not look good, but they also added a bit of exotic beauty. The last woman was wearing a long yellow muslin robe. Her pitch-black hair covered her hip. Her cold and white face was like the moon. She looked like a fairy. Chapter 981. 3 Men and 2 Women. Sky Splitter Sword Sex Myriad Mountains Pathless, Flying Heaven Pavilions Qin Tianyi, Extreme Black Palaces Sha Lu, Shattered Star Towers Yiyuan, and Myriad Mountain Villas Wan Feixian. 100 years ago, the 1st to 5th ranked disciples of the Good Fortune Heaven Tablet, the 5 Sword of Gojosian known as the West Tiger Region's 5 Absolutes, had gathered here. Their goal was the five-element sacred fruit. Recognizing Qin Tianyi and hearing the cries of surprise from all around, Chu Mu understood the identities of the other two men and two women. He couldn't help but size them up a few more times, thinking that they were indeed extraordinary. Their elegant demeanor was something no one could compare with. At the same time, Chu Mu's opinion of the five-element sacred fruit increased. It had actually provoked the West Tiger region's five sword of Gojoseon to take action. It was clear that the five-element sacred fruit was far more valuable than he had imagined. As for the five-element sacred fruit, Chu Mu didn't dare to have any thoughts of seizing it. But his eyes brightened. This was because he had heard of the West Tiger region's five absolutes' fame and how powerful they were. But as for how strong they were, he had never seen it with his own eyes. Now, he could finally witness it with his own eyes. The powerful five elements war sovereign, the powerful West Tiger region's five absolute. The five of them didn't speak. In their eyes there was only one goal, the five elements war sovereign. There was only one five elements war sovereign and one five-element sacred fruit. But there were five of them. In other words, in the end, only one of them would be able to obtain the five-element sacred fruit. The five-element sacred fruit's effects were heaven-defying. No one was willing to give it to anyone else. This meant that after killing the five elements war sovereign, there would be a great battle over the five-element sacred fruit. They seemed to have a tacit understanding. They drew their swords and attacked the five elements war sovereign. Five sword light, each with a different posture, were equally stunning. Five streaks of sword light shot through the sky like meteors. Lightning flashed through the skies, storms passed, magma flooded, and tsunamis wreaked havoc. In that instant, Chu Mu's spiritual world trembled and his soul trembled. The difference between their levels was too great. He could only feel the destructive power contained in each sword light. Even though he was far away, his body felt as if it had been locked onto. He couldn't help but tremble and tremble. The 5555 Absolute, and Sword of the Sword of Gojoseon. They knew that they couldn't dodge or sword light couldn't block the sword light. They knew that if they couldn't, they couldn't. Sword 5 absolutes is 5 sword 5 sword 5 sword. That's right. Facing them, I don't even have the courage to draw my sword. Some of the sword kings secretly discussed, with lingering fear in their hearts. An angry roar came from the flaming head of the five elements war sovereign. The five elements war sovereign waved his sword. The originally golden sword turned blue. A huge blue sword light surrounded the five elements war sovereign. It was like a surging river. The five sword light slashed at the five elements war sovereign. Water was both soft and tough. Any attack that landed in the water would be affected. Under the erosion of the river, the attack would be weakened. In the end, even if the attack passed through the river and hit the body, it would be greatly weakened. It wouldn't be able to cause any damage. The five sword light landed on the surface of the river. They were immediately swept away by the river and disappeared. The five powerful swords didn't cause any damage to the five elements war sovereign. What a strong defense, Shalu said. Water gives birth to wood. Wood gives birth to fire. Fire gives birth to earth. Earth gives birth to gold. Metal gives birth to water. This is the five elements earth rank 5 earth-breaking sword skill, Thousand Mountains said indifferently. Thousand Mountains wasn't the only one who saw the pattern of the attack. The others, including many sword of Gojoseon and Chu Mu, also saw the pattern of the attack. Water gives birth to wood. Wood gives birth to fire. Fire gives birth to earth. Earth gives birth to gold. Metal gives birth to water. After a cycle, the power of the water reached its peak. Then, a defensive sword skill was cast. It was an earth rank 5 earth-breaking sword skill. After defending against their attacks, the five elements battle emperor immediately counterattacked. He waved his gigantic sword, and in an instant, terrifying flames erupted like lava from a volcano. Countless balls of lava condensed into magma balls that shot out and locked onto the 5 people. Every magma fireball contained a terrifying power, infinitely close to the power of an Earth Tier 5th grade earth-breaking sword skill. The terrifying heat emitted caused the surrounding air to be burned into a vacuum. The magma fireball whizzed past, and because of the rapid flow of air, it created a sense of darkness that seemed to be about to collapse. It made one's heart palpitate and one's hair stand on end. Fire gives birth to earth. Earth gives birth to gold. Gold gives birth to water. Water gives birth to wood. Wood gives birth to fire. It's a cycle. Chu-Mu squinted his eyes and stared at the attack of the 5 elements war sovereign. It was extremely explosive and destructive. The 5 elements war sovereign's expression became serious. They either cast their defensive sword skills to defend themselves or cast their sword skills to dodge the attack. Then they counterattacked. They were also accumulating power and releasing earth-breaching sword skills of Earth rank 5th grade. Fire Dragon Soaring Sky, Divine Sword Peerless Divine Sword, Ice River Rolling Backwards, Stars Shattering, Blue Ocean Flowing in an Instant. 5 earth-breaking sword skills of the 5 elements war sovereign released terrifying power. They were 5 perfect earth-breaking sword skills of the earth-breaking sword skill. The aura of these 5 terrifying earth-breaking sword skills alone made the swordsmen who were watching from afar tremble in both body and soul. They had the illusion that the world was about to be destroyed. Some swordsmen could not bear it. Their strength suddenly exploded and they quickly retreated. They even spat out a mouthful of blood and suffered internal injuries. It was really terrifying. However, there were a few swordsmen whose eyes shone with a sharp light. They were yearning, hopeful, and filled with fighting spirit. They secretly made up their minds to spur themselves on. One day they could also be as powerful. Chu-Mu had this ambition. However, he wanted to create a 5th element war sovereign first. He wanted to break through to the creation realm and create the Sword of Gojoseon. Originally, Chu-Mu also had this idea. However, he was unable to comprehend it. Compared to a 4th element war sovereign, a 5th element war sovereign was 10 times more powerful. However, the difficulty of comprehending a 5th element war sovereign was hundreds or thousands of times more difficult than a 4th element war sovereign. Many swordsmen were unable to comprehend the slightest bit of a 5th grade sword skill in their entire lives. In other words, only a small number of swordsmen could comprehend a 5th element war sovereign. Even Qin Tianyi could not comprehend a 5th element war sovereign before he reached the creation realm. It had to be said that Chu-Mu was very ambitious. Now, after watching the 5 elements war sovereigns battle, he had gained a little understanding. It was very subtle, but it had planted a seed in his heart. However, this was still not enough. It was impossible to create a grade 5 sword skill with this little bit of comprehension. He needed to comprehend more. Chu-Mu only hoped that the battle between the 5 elements war sovereign and the 5 uniques could last longer. It was obviously unreasonable to engage in close combat with a giant like the 5 elements war sovereign. He could only use his sword techniques to attack and kill the 5 elements war sovereign. However, the 5 elements war sovereign used powerful defensive sword techniques again and again. Coupled with its strong body, it resisted the attacks of the 5 unique. The 5 unique's grade 5 sword skill was very powerful. After a few attacks, the 5 elements war emperor's huge body was riddled with scars. However, the 5 elements war emperor possessed a terrifying self-healing ability. Those scars healed rapidly in a very short time. Facing such a powerful and versatile opponent, the 5 uniques felt a headache. The 5 elements war sovereign had amazing combat strength, amazing defense, and terrifying self-healing ability. It was simply an unkillable monster. How could they kill it and obtain the 5 elements divine fruit? Use the sword mystery, Qin Tianyi said. Each of the 5 great powers had their own sword mysteries. It was difficult to comprehend and cultivate them. However, the sword mysteries that had magical effects and offensive power were amazing. As soon as Qin Tianyi finished speaking, the sword in his hand flew out. An extremely strong sword light burst out. In the blink of an eye, the sword light shot up to the sky and locked onto the 5 elements war sovereign. It fell from the sky like a meteor with the power to destroy the world. The Flying Heaven Pavilion's sword mystery, meteor fall. Chu Mu knew that aside from the Flying Sky Pavilion's defensive sword technique, there were other sword secrets. However, he had only comprehended the defensive sword technique and hadn't touched upon the other sword secret. One reason was because of time and flying sky value. 2 was because the other sword secrets were many times harder to comprehend than the defensive sword technique. After all, the defensive sword technique was one of the foundations of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. It was also the foundation of all sword mysteries. It was the easiest to comprehend among the sword mysteries. Chu Mu only knew about the defensive sword technique. He knew nothing about the other sword mysteries. This was the first time he had seen a sword mystery other than the defensive sword technique in the Flying Heaven Pavilion. The falling sword light was like a meteor. It carried a terrifying power that could destroy the world. It was as if it was going to destroy the 5 elements war sovereign. The others also displayed their sword mysteries one after another. They were all powerful sword mysteries. 1,000 Mountains held his sword horizontally in front of him. The sword vibrated at a high frequency that was invisible to the naked eye. Even the power of divine sense could not detect it. Around the blade, tiny spatial cracks appeared and disappeared in an instant. The edge of the blade was covered in a faint, inconspicuous black color. However, it emitted a terrifying aura. Soon after, 1,000 Mountains' pathless sword swung out. That slash cut out a perfectly straight line, but that line was black. Chu Mu's pupils contracted rapidly. He could feel the terrifying power contained within the black line. Perhaps in terms of power, it was not as strong as Qin Tianyi's sword mystery. However, the power was more restrained. Most importantly, Chu Mu could feel the aura of emptiness within it. The black line twisted and shot towards the 5 elements war sovereign. Sword mystery of the sky-splitting sword sect. Space-shattering slash. Sha Lu of the Black Extreme Palace gathered a large amount of black light on his sword. The black light flowed like mercury. At the same time, an incomparably dark aura erupted from his body. Together with his sword, he soared into the sky. A resounding dragon roar filled the air. Shortly after, circles of black ripples appeared in the sky and spread out. From the center of the black ripples, the head of a ferocious black dragon appeared. It rushed out in an instant. The black dragon seemed to be made of black flames as it swooped down. Sword mystery of the Black Extreme Palace, world-destroying black dragon wave. Chapter 982. Flying Heaven Pavilion's secret sword, meteor fall. Sky-splitting sword sect's secret sword, air-piercing kill. Black Extreme Palace's secret sword, black dragon wave of destruction. Zhong Yuan of the Shattered Star Tower also performed a secret sword of the Shattered Star Tower. The odd-shaped short sword in her hand seemed to have been changed by a strong force. Countless amounts of energy surged into it, but it was deeply restrained, and there was a frightening energy fluctuation. Zhong Yuan's face, which carried a wild charm, had a grave expression. Her eyes flickered with a cold glint that caused one's heart to palpitate, like a whirlpool. In an instant, the short sword in her hand flew out and shot towards the 5 elements war emperor. It pierced through everything and hit his weak point. Shattered Star Tower's secret sword, heart-piercing sword. The heart-piercing sword pierced through the heart, and death was certain. Wan Feixian had also completed her secret sword of the Wanlao manner. Streaks of white sword light appeared on her graceful body. Countless streaks of white sword light were densely packed. They were like a school of fish swimming in the deep sea, spiraling around Wan Feixian's delicate body. Then, they changed their direction and locked onto the 5 elements war emperor. Then, they rushed towards him. There were more than 10,000 streaks of white sword light, and each of them contained various attributes and profound meanings. It was extremely terrifying. Wanlao Manor's secret sword, myriad swords greeting, the 5 major forces, the 5 sword of Gojoseon, and the 5 secret swords, released an incomparably terrifying power in an instant. The 5 elements War Emperor was indeed powerful, but under the bombardment of the 5 sword of Gojoseon's secret swords, he couldn't dodge them. Even if he used a defensive sword skill, he couldn't resist them. These 5 moves were displayed by the 5 great sword of Gojoseon. Their power had reached the pinnacle of the earth-breaking sword skill of the Earth rank 5th realm. Moreover, there was a unique power that was extremely terrifying. Under these 5 moves, the 5 elements War Emperor's defense was shattered. His body was torn apart by the heart-piercing sword. His head was chopped off by the sky-piercing sword. His body was shattered by the meteor fall and the black dragon wave of annihilation. Finally, he was reduced to dust by the 1,000 swords greeting sword. Most of the swordsmen were far away, but they were still impacted by the aura. Their chi and blood surged, and they suffered internal injuries. They spat out mouthfuls of blood. Even Chu Mu grunted. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, but he paid it no mind. His eyes burned with passion. The power of the 5 great sword mysteries was incomparably tyrannical. It was simply too shocking. Chu Mu's heart was greatly impacted. He had an impulse that made him want to go all out against the 5 sword of Gojoseon. However, he still had his reason. He was very clear that the gap between him and the 5 great sword of Gojoseon was not small. It was more than 10,000 times or even 100,000 times. A casual sword strike from them could kill him instantly. There was no comparison between the two of them. However, Chu Mu was not discouraged. Instead, he was filled with fighting spirit. In terms of talent, he was not below the 5 great sword of Gojoseon. In some aspects he was even above them. Therefore, if he had enough time, it was not impossible for him to catch up or even surpass them. The 5 elements War Emperor collapsed. The 5-colored aura rushed out in all directions. There was nowhere to hide. The 5 sword of Gojoseon dodged continuously. Their eyes had never left the center of the 5 elements War Emperor's body. At the center of the 5 elements War Emperor's crumbling body, there was a 5-colored circle of light. Within that circle of light was the 5 elements sacred fruit that they had been dreaming of. The 5 great sword of Gojoseon rushed towards the 5 elements sacred fruit at full speed. It was the only 5 elements sacred fruit. There was only one 5 elements sacred fruit, but there were 5 of them. They were bound to fight for it. Each of them mustered up their strength and prepared to attack and defend. At this moment, the sky above the 5 great sword of Gojoseon suddenly darkened. It was as if in an instant, the sky had turned from day to night. The darkness shrouded the area in an instant, forming a dark sphere. It enveloped the 5 great sword of Gojoseon and the 5 elements sacred fruit. The swordsmen outside could only see absolute darkness. Even when they released their spiritual sense, it was blocked outside. They had no idea what was happening inside. The 5 great sword of Gojoseon only felt that the moment the darkness shrouded them, their bodies were locked in place by a tyrannical force. Although it was only for a moment, they were able to break free from the force that imprisoned them. However, their eyes were affected and they could not see anything. When they released their spiritual sense, it was extremely difficult, as if their feet were stuck in a swamp. This feeling only lasted for a breath of time. In the blink of an eye, their spiritual sense returned to normal. Their vision also returned to normal. Immediately, they were stunned because the 5 elements sacred fruit in the center had disappeared. It was as if it had disappeared into thin air. It was as if it had never appeared. This immediately infuriated the 5 great sword of Gojoseon. In an instant, they knew that someone had suddenly attacked. First, he had used some kind of secret technique. Then, he had seized the opportunity to steal the 5 elements' sacred fruit right under their noses. The 5 great sword of Gojoseon seemed to have a tacit understanding. Without any discussion, each of them was responsible for one direction. Their spiritual sense swept out violently like a tidal wave. Wherever it passed, the souls of the swordsmen who were swept by it trembled. Their spiritual worlds seemed to be on the verge of collapse. In their fury, the 5 great sword of Gojoseon did not have so many scruples. You stole my 5 elements' sacred fruit and tried to escape. Die. Sha Lu noticed something and immediately drew her sword. With a slash, a black sword ray pierced through the air. Thousands of meters ahead, a figure flashed. He avoided the black sword ray and left at an even faster speed. At the same time, he said in a hoarse and gloomy voice, "I am Black Hell, the sword of Gojoseon. The 5 great sword of West Tiger is nothing more than this." This sentence was purely to provoke hatred. The 5 great sword of Gojoseon exploded and chased after him. In the blink of an eye, Black Hell, the sword of Gojoseon, and the 5 great sword of Gojoseon disappeared without a trace. A shocking battle had ended. In the end, the one who had obtained the 5 elements' sacred fruit was not any of the 5 great sword of Gojoseon. Instead, it was a mysterious person who claimed to be Black Hell, the sword of Gojoseon. It was a very dramatic outcome. Is he really from Black Hell, or is he trying to frame me? Chumu could not help but think. The mysterious person could have escaped without saying anything, but he had left such a sentence. What was his motive? Was he trying to frame Black Hell? Or was he really from Black Hell and that was his nature? Or was he trying to anger the 5 great sword of Gojoseon? As for whether the 5 great sword of Gojoseon would be able to catch up with the Black Hell sword of Gojoseon, take back the 5 elements' sacred fruit from the sword of Gojoseon, and whose hands the 5 elements' sacred fruit would end up in, Chumu wanted to know. It was just that he did not have the opportunity to do so. The other sword of Gojoseon had also woken up from their stupor. In an instant, the advanced sword of Gojoseon turned into streaks of light and rushed towards the center of the battlefield, where the 5 elements' war emperor had been destroyed. The 5 elements' sacred fruit was gone, and they did not dare to hope for it. However, they did not know what the 5 elements' war emperor had left behind after it had been destroyed. The advanced sword of Gojoseon were extremely fast. They were the first to reach the place where the 5 elements' war emperor had been destroyed. Their targets were the 5 items that had fallen on the ground. There was a golden aura, a sapling, a miniature river, a burning flame, and a small mountain. To put it simply, the 5 things that had fallen on the ground were the shrunken versions of the 5 elemental forms from before. The golden aura was only about a foot long, and it emitted a sharp and pure aura. Of course, it was not as strong as the golden aura from before. As for the sapling, it was only a foot tall and exuded a vigorous vitality. The miniature version of the Blue River was also about a foot long, and the ball of flame was about the size of a fist. It burned fiercely and exuded a high temperature. As for the small mountain, it was also about a foot tall. In terms of size, it was far from being comparable to the 5 elements' war emperor. In terms of strength, it was also far from being comparable to the 5 elements' war emperor. However, when the sword of Gojoseon saw the miniature version of the 5 elements' war emperor, they realized that it was an extraordinary treasure. They did not hesitate to snatch it. There were 5 treasures, but there were more than 5 advanced sword of Gojoseon. Moreover, there were still intermediate sword of Gojoseon and lower sword of Gojoseon who wanted to get a share of the loot. There were too many monks and too little gruel. How could they split the loot? There was no need to split the loot. Everything depended on one's means and ability. However, the current situation was a bit tricky. The sword of Gojoseon surrounded the 5 treasures in a circle. However, no one dared to act rashly. If anyone acted first and tried to snatch the 5 treasures, they would definitely be attacked by the others. In a one-on-one fight, these advanced Sword of Gojosian were not afraid. However, if they were surrounded, no one could withstand it. Intermediate and Lower Sword of Gojosian, scram. A advanced Sword of Gojosian suddenly spoke with a gloomy expression. The other advanced Sword of Gojosian immediately agreed. They emitted an extremely tyrannical aura, forcing the intermediate Sword of Gojosian and Lower Sword of Gojosian to leave. Otherwise, they would slaughter them. Under the threat of the advanced Sword of Gojosian, even though the intermediate and Lower Sword of Gojosian were very unwilling, they did not dare to stay. They could only turn around and leave. There were a total of 13 advanced Sword of Gojosian, but only 5 treasures. I have a suggestion. Let's all attack together. Whoever grabs the treasures will get it. A advanced Sword of Gojosian rolled his eyes and suggested. I think that's fine. Otherwise, when the 5 Sword of Gojosian return, none of us will get it. Another advanced Sword of Gojosian said. Let's do it. Let's compete with strength. After unanimously agreeing, the advanced Sword of Gojosian nodded one after another. Each of them was prepared and ready to attack. There were only 3 breaths of time, and as soon as the 3 breaths of time were up, all of the high-level Sword Kings made their moves. In the blink of an eye, they erupted with their greatest speed and power. Without holding anything back, they transformed into beams of light that shot toward the 5 treasures at incredible speed. 13 advanced Sword of Gojosian, 5 treasures. Among them, 3 advanced Sword of Gojosian rushed towards the form of metal, 2 advanced Sword of Gojosian rushed towards the form of wood, 3 advanced Sword of Gojosian rushed towards the form of water, 3 advanced Sword of Gojosian rushed towards the form of fire, and 2 advanced Sword of Gojosian rushed towards the form of earth. Everyone took what they needed and relied on their own method. Whoever grabbed the treasures would get it. As for the intermediate and Lower Sword of Gojosian and Lower Sword of Gojosian, they stopped and turned around to look at the advanced Sword of Gojosian. Chapter 983. Reality proved that under the temptation of such a treasure, there were many things that could not be trusted. When the first Sword of Gojosian reached out his hand towards the image of metal and was about to grab it, the other 2 Sword of Gojosian, who were a bit slower, did not hesitate to slash out horizontally. One of the swords slashed towards the arm, while the other slashed towards the head. The Sword of Gojosian, who was about to obtain the image of metal, was shocked and angry. If he insisted on grabbing the image of metal, not only would his arm be cut off, but his body would also be cut off and he would die without a doubt. In his anger, the Sword of Gojosian immediately retracted his hand. His body twisted like a snake, avoiding the slashes of the 2 swords. At the same time, his sword split into 2 and slashed towards the other 2 Sword of Gojosian. The other Sword of Gojosian who were fighting for the treasure also made their moves, and a battle broke out. The saying that the treasure would belong to whoever grabbed it first was just a joke. No one would watch the treasure be taken away by someone else. The 13 Sword of Gojosian erupted into a fierce battle. Sword techniques were used to kill, and sword skills were used to kill without mercy. The 5 treasures quietly fell on the ground, and did not move at all. They were constantly absorbing the 5 elemental chi around them to strengthen themselves. However, most of the 5 elemental chi in the 5 elemental land had been absorbed before, and all of it was used to grow the 5 elemental sacred fruit. Then, the 5 elemental war emperor was defeated by Wu Ju, leaving behind a miniature version of the image of 5 elemental. Its power was extremely weak. When its power was weak, the efficiency of absorbing the 5 elemental chi was low. In addition, the 5 elemental chi in the 5 elemental land was also extremely weak. This made the absorption efficiency of the miniature version of the image of 5 elemental very low. According to the current situation, it would take at least tens of thousands of years or even longer to recover to its original state, provided that the 5 elements aura in the 5 elements land was not exhausted. The battle between the 13 advanced sword of Gojosian instantly turned the area within 10,000 meters into a forbidden zone. Because of the tyrannical fluctuations of sword of Gojosian spreading out, the storm madly sweeping out. Once someone entered, even an intermediate sword of Gojosian would be in a difficult situation. If a low sword of Gojosian were to be affected by the shock waves, it was very likely that they would die on the spot, not to mention Chu Mu and the other sword masters. Once again, he was reduced to a spectator, but Chu Mu was not depressed at all. Instead, he focused on watching. Watching experts fight was also a type of cultivation, a type of tempering. One could gain enlightenment and use it on oneself. More often than not, one could improve oneself or increase one's accumulation. There were quite a few sword masters who had the same thoughts as Chu Mu, and they all watched. The 13 advanced sword of Gojosian did not target anyone. They attacked whenever they saw someone. If they could kill one, they would have one less competitor. As long as there were 5 left, it would be enough. However, the strength of these advanced sword of Gojosian was not too different, and the situation was very chaotic. It was extremely difficult to kill any one of them. Although the battle was very intense, none of the advanced sword of Gojosian had died. At most, they had suffered some light injuries. A few of the advanced sword of Gojosian realized that this could not go on, so they simply transmitted messages to each other and attacked one of the advanced sword of Gojosian together. It was too sudden. A few powerful sword of Gojosian simultaneously blasted towards one of the advanced sword of Gojosian. It was unexpected. The advanced sword of Gojosian only managed to dodge one of the attacks, but he was hit by the other attacks, and was seriously injured and on the verge of death. Even if I die, I will drag a few of you down with me. The advanced sword of Gojosian knew that his injuries were very serious. In such an intense battle, there was no way he could survive. Therefore, he burned his boats and gathered all the available energy in his body to self-destruct. The power of an advanced sword of Gojosian's self-destruction was extremely terrifying. Even if he was injured, the power was still several times stronger than an Earth-tier 5th-tier Earthbreaker sword skill. Under the self-destruction of the advanced sword of Gojosian, terrifying blood blossomed and covered a radius of 1,000 meters. The 3 advanced sword of Gojosian within 1,000 meters were all affected. Shocked, they hurriedly used defensive sword skills to resist. However, the power of the self-destruction was too strong. The 3 advanced sword of Gojosian spat out a mouthful of blood, and their internal organs were shaken. Fight, fight, fight. 3 advanced sword of Gojosian self-destructed one after another. However, after the first advanced sword of Gojosian self-destructed, the other advanced sword of Gojosian were prepared. Under the self-destruction of the 3 advanced sword of Gojosian, a total of 5 advanced sword of Gojosian suffered internal injuries. Their battle strength was also affected and decreased by a lot. The other 5 advanced sword of Gojosian suffered minor injuries, but their battle strength was not affected. They suddenly forced the other 5 advanced sword of Gojosian to retreat and then rush towards the 5 treasures on the ground, each taking one. Stay! The 5 advanced sword of Gojosian who suffered internal injuries were furious. They ignored their internal injuries and attacked with all their strength. Although their internal injuries were worsened, it was worth it as long as they could prevent the other 5 from obtaining the treasures. Damn it! The 5 advanced sword of Gojosian who wanted to obtain the treasures were furious. Some of them directly gave up and avoided the attack, while one of them gritted his teeth and decided to fight head-on to obtain the treasures first. The power of the angry attack was very strong. Even though the advanced sword of Gojosian had made all kinds of preparations, he was still unable to use a defensive sword skill. He was hit and spat out a mouthful of blood. Several bones in his body were broken, his internal organs were injured, and his muscles were torn. He was severely injured in an instant. However, at the same time, The advanced sword of Gojosian, who had suffered heavy injuries from the attack, borrowed the power of the sword's skill and his own speed to increase his speed by several times. In an instant, he grabbed the form of wood and grabbed it in his hand. Then, relying on his strong will, he used a secret method to increase his speed. In the blink of an eye, he was dozens of times faster than the speed of sound. The change was too fast. In just a breath's time, the form of wood had been seized and the advanced sword of Gojosian had disappeared without a trace. Don't even think about leaving. The advanced sword of Gojosian, who was interested in the form of wood, was furious. He immediately chased after the advanced sword of Gojosian. However, he was seriously injured and did not use a secret method, so his speed was far slower. After the advanced sword of Gojosian left, some of the intermediate swords of Gojosian thought for a while and also left. It seemed that they were planning to be the aureole behind the mantis stalking the cicada. The remaining 8 advanced sword of Gojosian, who had suffered light internal injuries, once again tried to seize the 4 treasures. The advanced sword of Gojosian, who had seized the form of wood, had given them a hint. Suddenly, the 8 advanced sword of Gojosian all used secret methods to increase their strength or speed. The intermediate sword of Gojosian and the intermediate sword of Gojosian on the periphery were also waiting for an opportunity. The advanced sword of Gojosian was indeed very powerful, but once he was seriously injured and his combat strength was greatly reduced, the intermediate sword of Gojosian and the intermediate sword of Gojosian might have a chance. Chumu looked at the final battle between the 8 advanced sword of Gojosian and then looked at the intermediate sword of Gojosian and the intermediate sword of Gojosian in the surrounding sky. His thoughts turned, and he immediately turned around and headed in the direction that the advanced sword of Gojosian, who had seized the form of wood, had left. Wealth and silk moved people's hearts, not to mention such a precious treasure. Chumu was also a member of the swordsmen, so it was impossible for him not to be moved. The reason why he did not participate in the fight before was entirely because he was not strong enough. But now, the advanced sword of Gojosian was seriously injured, and there was another advanced sword of Gojosian chasing after it. There was also a group of intermediate sword of Gojosian chasing after it. The situation was very complicated, and he might have a slight chance of obtaining the form of wood. Even if he could not obtain it, the 3 strands of Tianhuang's sword were enough to protect himself. Chumu's speed was not slow, but compared to the sword of Gojosian, it was still much slower. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed, and Chumu saw a broken corpse on the ground. It was one of the intermediate sword of Gojosian that he had chased before. The corpse was very broken, but the spatial ring was still there. Chumu immediately took it, and after operating the slaughter divine weapon to absorb the negative aura, he did not check what was inside and immediately chased after it. About another 2 hours passed, and Chumu felt waves of tyrannical aura fluctuations colliding with each other, causing all kinds of explosions. It was very tyrannical. Restraining his own aura fluctuations, he quickly approached close to the ground, and the fluctuations became more and more intense. Even if I am seriously injured, I am still not someone that intermediate sword of Gojosian can contend against. All of you die for me. A furious roar shook the heavens and the earth, and the terrifying energy fluctuations seemed to shatter the earth. In the distance, Chumu stopped and saw a few figures fighting in the air. The one being besieged was not the advanced sword of Gojosian that had obtained the wood aspect, but the one who had chased after him. The ones besieging him were the group of intermediate sword of Gojosian that had chased after him. There were a total of 6 of them. He is seriously injured. As long as we hold on, he won't be able to hold on for long. An intermediate sword of Gojosian shouted. Under normal circumstances, 6 intermediate sword of Gojosian would not be able to contend against 1 advanced sword of Gojosian. However, at this time, the advanced sword of Gojosian was seriously injured, and his battle power had been greatly reduced. As time passed, the sword of Gojosian began to be injured one by one. Not long after, 2 intermediate sword of Gojosian were killed. Similarly, the advanced sword of Gojosian's injuries were even more serious, and he was on the verge of collapse. In the end, the advanced sword of Gojosian used all his means to kill all the intermediate sword of Gojosian. After that, he fell from the sky and only had 1 breath left. After a short rest, the advanced sword of Gojosian took out a pill and threw it into his mouth. At the same time, a terrifying sword intent locked onto him. This sword intent made him feel a sense of desolation and desolation. He felt that his injuries were being corroded by the sword intent, and they were getting worse. He could not move at all. He was seriously injured, and after going through an intense battle, his injuries worsened and he almost fainted. The power of his divine sense was almost exhausted, and he could not resist being corroded by the sword intent. He could only feel fear, and his vision darkened. Immediately, the advanced sword of Gojosian vaguely saw a figure flash, and it seemed like another sword light flashed in front of his eyes. After the pain came, he fell into darkness. His head was directly cut off by the sword, and he died on the spot. Chu Mu did not hesitate to draw his sword. After killing the advanced sword of Gojosian, he immediately took action and took the advanced sword of Gojosian's spatial ring. Then, he used the heaven-seizing great technique to steal the cultivation talent, and then used the slaughter godly sword of Gojosian to absorb the negative aura. He did not even let go of the intermediate sword of Gojosian. Chapter 984. Within his middle dantian, the Kamihira sword embryo that had absorbed the negative aura from the deaths of the high-grade sword of Gojosian and the mid-grade sword of Gojosian trembled lightly once more, emitting clear hums. Chu Mu could feel the joy of the sword of Gojosian as it became even more tyrannical. Finally, the Kamihira sword embryo had risen from high grade to supreme grade. Its toughness was comparable to that of an ordinary king-grade sword. The more powerful an existence was, the stronger the negative aura after death would be. The negative aura from the corpse of a high-grade sword of Gojosian, especially one that had gone through a life-and-death battle, was even more than that of thousands of divine condensation realm swordsmen, not to mention that there were several mid-grade sword of Gojosian. Carrying the 9 spatial rings, Chu Mu did not even check them. He immediately erupted with his full speed and did his best to restrain his aura as he rapidly left. The battle here was extremely intense, and the fluctuations of aura were extremely great. It was very likely that it would attract others over. Along the way, he changed his location several times, setting up formations to confuse others, and so on. In the end, he rushed out of the land of 5 elements and left far away. The land of 5 elements would remain open for 3 months, and it was not yet time for it to close. However, because of the 5 elements' sacred fruit, the aura of the 5 elements within the land of 5 elements had become very weak. Many of the older spiritual herbs and so on had also been greatly damaged. If he continued to stay, there would not be much of a harvest. On the contrary, it might even cause unnecessary danger. Moreover, Chu Mu had already obtained quite a few sword of Gojosian's spatial rings. He believed that the collection within would definitely be very rich. After leaving the land of 5 elements far away, Chu Mu set up formations again to avoid being chased by others. It was better to be careful. Chu Mu seized the cave of a powerful archaic vicious beast and set up layers of seals. Some were used to isolate aura while others were used to defend. Afterwards, he stayed within the cave and took out the spatial rings he had obtained from the land of 5 elements. The 2-star sword of Gojosian and Samsung sword of Gojosian that he had personally killed before did not count. This was because the collection within their spatial rings was a bit shabby, and could not even compare to Chu Mu's collection. After that, he obtained a total of 9 spatial rings. 7 of them belonged to the 7 intermediate sword of Gojosian, while the other 2 belonged to the advanced sword of Gojosian. Presumably, the advanced sword of Gojosian who obtained the sword of Gojosian must have been chased down. He was heavily injured and had to use a secret technique, so he couldn't maintain it for long. After the other advanced sword of Gojosian caught up to him, a great battle ensued. The advanced sword of Gojosian who obtained the sword of Gojosian died, but he fought back with all his might, severely injuring the pursuing advanced sword of Gojosian, Chumu speculated. After that, the 7 intermediate sword of Gojosian seized the opportunity to join forces and aggravate the advanced sword of Gojosian's injuries. In the end, the 7 intermediate sword of Gojosian were all killed. However, the advanced sword of Gojosian's injuries were also extremely serious. He could not even fly and could only take elixirs when he landed. Chumu seized the opportunity and released the Sky Baron sword of Gojosian to lock onto the advanced sword of Gojosian. If the advanced sword of Gojosian was in his prime, Chumu would have been able to escape even if he used the Sky Baron sword of Gojosian to lock onto his opponent. The strength of the advanced sword of Gojosian was many times more tyrannical than that of the metal-grade sword of Gojosian. Even though the Sky Baron sword of Gojosian was a saint-level sword intent and was extremely tyrannical, once struck, even a low-level sword saint could fall. However, the strength of the person controlling the Sky Baron sword of Gojosian was too low. He was simply unable to fully display the true power of the Sky Baron sword of Gojosian. Of course, with the Sky Baron sword of Gojosian, even if he was facing the advanced sword of Gojosian, he would still have a certain degree of deterrence and the ability to protect himself. Unfortunately, the advanced sword of Gojosian was unlucky. The injuries it had suffered were too serious. The power of its divine sense had been greatly depleted, and its resistance to the Sky Baron sword of Gojosian was at its lowest. Under the situation of being locked onto by the Sky Baron sword of Gojosian, let alone resisting, even struggling was very strenuous. Chumu also seized this opportunity to kill the advanced sword of Gojosian while the Sky Baron sword of Gojosian was intimidated by the Sky Baron sword of Gojosian. Otherwise, if the advanced sword of Gojosian was given some time to recover and adapt, he would most likely lose the opportunity to kill it. If he could not kill the other party, it would be useless even if he obtained the other party's space ring, because the other party's divine sense imprint was still there. Based on the current strength of his divine sense, it was simply not comparable to that of the advanced sword of Gojosian. Chumu did not hesitate to kill the advanced sword of Gojosian, who had no power to resist and had no enmity with him, nor did he feel the slightest burden afterwards. The world of swordsmen was like this. In order to compete for all cultivation resources, killing was a very normal thing. Practicing the sword was not for the sake of looking good, but for the sake of strengthening oneself. The sword was a weapon of slaughter. In other words, if Chumu had any treasures that caught the advanced sword of Gojosian's eye, he would most likely be killed by the advanced sword of Gojosian. There was no right or wrong. Everything was for the sake of plundering better resources to make oneself stronger. The world of swordsmen was a cruel world. With a thought, Chumu eliminated all distracting thoughts and began to check the space rings. The first thing he checked was naturally the space ring of the advanced sword of Gojosian that Chumu had killed. This was because Chumu wanted to know if the form of wood was in it. Since the advanced sword of Gojosian was dead, the divine sense imprint naturally dissipated. Chumu's divine sense power entered the space ring without any hindrance. His divine remembrance swept through the enormous spatial ring and Chumu's face showed a hint of joy. With a thought, an item appeared in his hand. It emitted a dense and vigorous life force and was extremely lively. It was a 1-foot-long sapling. It was the form of wood that Chumu wanted. The rich vitality of the form of wood in his hand shocked Chumu. Immersed in this rich vitality, Chu Mu only felt his body was unprecedentedly comfortable and relaxed. It was as if he had been reborn. It was as if all the hidden injuries in his body were being healed by this lively vitality, causing his body to slowly approach its most perfect state. Taking a deep breath, exuberant life force filled his body. Chu Mu's face unconsciously revealed a trace of intoxication. This kind of feeling was really too great. Such a large form of wood already has such rich vitality. What would it be like if the form of wood was at its peak? Chu Mu could not help but sigh. Immediately, he thought of the 5 elements sacred fruit. The 5 elements sacred fruit had been born from a large portion of the power of the form of 5 elements. It was hard to imagine how precious the 5 elements sacred fruit was. Chu Mu could not help but have a thought. Who would get the 5 elements sacred fruit in the end? Chu Mu did not know how to use the form of wood, because he did not have much understanding of the form of 5 elements. He could only wait until he returned to the Flying Heaven Pavilion to look up the relevant ancient book. After putting away the form of wood, he began to take inventory of the other items in the space ring. The high-grade sword of Gojoseon's collection was still very rich. There were tens of millions of high-grade yuan crystals alone, and millions of top-grade yuan crystals alone. In addition, there were also many 5 elements spiritual herbs, all of which were at least 1,000 years old. The oldest one was more than 10,000 years old. There were also many 5 elements spiritual ores, and even celestial fire, which was at the same level as celestial gold. In addition, there were saint-grade swords, saint-grade inner armor, and saint-grade low-grade and mid-grade saint-grade robes. There were also all kinds of cultivation methods, knowledge secrets, and the high-grade sword of Gojoseon's cultivation experiences and so on. After checking, he began to check the other high-grade sword of Gojoseon's space ring. Naturally, there was no form of wood in this high-grade sword of Gojoseon's space ring. However, there were tens of millions of high-grade yuan crystals, millions of top-grade yuan crystals, and 5 caddies of yuan liquid. In addition, there were also many 5 elements spiritual herbs and 5 elements spiritual ores. None of the 5 elements spiritual herbs were less than 1,000 years old. There were even 3 10,000-year-old spiritual herbs, and the oldest one was at least 30,000 years old. Its value was incomparably precious. As for the 5 elements spiritual ores, there were celestial extreme water, celestial extreme gold, and celestial extreme fire spiritual ores of the same level. There were also many books on medicinal pills, cultivation methods, and so on. After that, he checked the 7 mid-grade sword of Gojoseon's space rings one by one. The wealth of these mid-grade sword of Gojoseon obviously couldn't be compared to the high-grade sword of Gojoseon's space rings, but it wasn't little either. There were close to 30 million high-grade yuan crystals, and over 3 million top-grade yuan crystals. There were also several hundred stalks of 5 elements spiritual herbs that were at least 1,000 years old, and the oldest 9,000 years old. There were also 5 elements spiritual ores, cultivation methods, medicinal pills, and a lot of other ores and metals. There are close to 100 million high-grade yuan crystals, over 6 million top-grade yuan crystals, and 5 kilograms of yuan liquid. The 5 elements spiritual herbs are at least 1,000 years old, and the oldest is 30,000 years old. In total, there are 1,560 stalks of 5 elements spiritual ores, and over 1,300 pieces. Chu Mu sorted out the same things one by one, then took out some space bracelets and put them into the space rings according to the classification. In this way, it was clear and precise, and he wouldn't be flustered when he needed to use it in the future. After everything was sorted out, Chu Mu breathed out a sigh of relief. This was a huge harvest. This harvest was really huge. Not to mention other things, just the close to 100 million high-grade yuan crystals alone was enough to make countless people green with envy. In simple terms, all the smaller families and forces might not be able to take out 100 million high-grade yuan crystals at once. Even for the Flying Heaven Pavilion, 100 million high-grade yuan crystals was a great fortune. Moreover, there were over 6 million top-grade yuan crystals, which in theory was equivalent to over 600 million high-grade yuan crystals. The actual value was estimated to be over 700 million high-grade yuan crystals. Even some low-level sword saints might not have as many yuan crystals as Chu Mu. Yuan crystals were one thing, but there were also a lot of 5 elements spiritual herbs and 5 elements spiritual ores. If they were to be sold, they would be worth a lot of yuan crystals. Of course, Chu Mu wouldn't sell them. The most important thing was that 1-foot-tall sapling, the wood aspect. Chu Mu felt that the wood aspect was the most valuable thing. Although he didn't know what the wood aspect was used for, if he had to choose between the wealth and the wood aspect, he would definitely choose the wood aspect. Now, let's return to the Flying Heaven Pavilion and comprehend the 5th-grade sword skill. Chu Mu said to himself, then removed the layers of seals and left the fearsome beast cave. Chapter 985. Compared to when he had left the Flying Heaven Pavilion, Chu Mu's current speed was a little faster. His journey was unimpeded, and he didn't encounter any ambushes. Soon, he arrived at West Wind Town. After resting for a while, Chu Mu left West Wind Town and headed for the entrance of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. The entrance of the Flying Heaven Pavilion was several hundred meters in the air. Chu Mu used the Imperial Sword technique and soared into the air. Then, he took out his Flying Heaven Pavilion Disciple Identity Sword token. It immediately emitted a burst of light and wrapped around Chu Mu's body. Then, he turned into a stream of light and rushed into the entrance of the Flying Heaven Pavilion, entering the miniature world of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. Unknowingly, after leaving the Flying Heaven Pavilion for more than half a year, Chu Mu's strength had improved significantly. His potential had also increased a lot. Compared to before, he was even more powerful. Without stopping, Chu Mu went to report first. After that, he returned to the Soaring Sky Academy. When Chu Mu finished reporting, the elders immediately received news that Chu Mu had returned to the Flying Heaven Pavilion. For the Flying Heaven Pavilion, this wasn't a small matter. As soon as Chu Mu entered the valley of the Soaring Sky Academy, he was immediately discovered by the disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy. "Chief Senior Brother, you're back." His face was full of excitement as he exclaimed loudly, "Chief Senior Brother is back." Before Chu Mu could say anything, a disciple of the Soaring Sky Academy shouted loudly. His voice was like rolling thunder, reverberating through the entire valley of the Soaring Sky Academy. Many people were startled when they heard this voice. Then, they became excited and rushed towards the valley of the Soaring Sky Academy. Chu Mu couldn't help but shake his head. He hadn't expected that his return would make the disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy so excited. "Chief Senior Brother." Along the way, the disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy he met were all excited from the bottom of their hearts. They saluted Chu Mu and shouted loudly. Hundreds of disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy were in front of him. This scene made Chu Mu feel an indescribable feeling. "How is it? Senior Brother Chu, you must be shocked." Zhong Mukan appeared beside Chu Mu and laughed as he spoke to Chu Mu. Chu Mu nodded. "Congratulations to Senior Brother Chu for obtaining the honor of being the first fortune disciple." Zhong Mukan smiled again, congratulating Chu Feng from the bottom of his heart. Regardless of whether there were any substantial benefits, the title of the number 1 fortune disciple was a supreme honor and honor. Even the Flying Heaven Pavilion enjoyed it, and its reputation soared. "Junior brothers, let's disperse," Chu Mu said. After he finished speaking, he walked towards his own stone tower. Zhong Mukan also followed Chu Mu into the stone tower and chatted with Chu Mu along the way. "Senior Brother Chu, in the past 6 months, I feel that my strength has improved, so I'm here to seek your guidance." Zhong Mukan saluted Chu Mu with his sword and said seriously, "Please." Chu Mu did not refuse. Zhong Mukan unsheathed his sword in an instant and rushed forward. sword light flickered as it pierced towards Chu Mu. It was fast and sharp, and it was perfectly straight. From this sword, it could be seen that Zhong Mukin's sword skills had improved compared to half a year ago. The non-return sword was unsheathed, and it clashed with Zhong Mukin's sword skills. Zhong Mukin's sword skills had improved a little, but Chu Mu's improvement in sword skills was even more obvious. In the field of sword skills, he had already reached the peak of the 10th layer, the limit. In terms of sword skills, he had also reached the peak of form. If he had another breakthrough, he would be the god of sword skills. This battle was more of a test of Zhong Mukin's improvement. Therefore, Chu Mu mostly defended, and occasionally counterattacked with his sword. This was also to force Zhong Mukin to show more of his strength, or to indirectly give him pointers. Under the collision of the two swords, Zhong Mukin flew back and threw the sword in his hand. Immediately, the index and middle fingers of his left hand joined together like a sword. He muttered and displayed the sword control technique. The sword light of the sword control technique shot out with astonishing sharpness towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu gently waved his sword and immediately broke the flying sword. Zhong Mukin's left hand's sword finger again controlled the flying sword, attacking Chu Mu from every angle. However, it was easily blocked by Chu Mu's sword. After about a dozen attacks, Zhong Mukin withdrew his flying sword and stopped the sword control technique. Immediately, his aura erupted and he displayed the flame spiral thunder wave sword technique. After Zhong Mukin's comprehension and improvement, the flame spiral thunder wave sword technique was now more powerful than half a year ago. Chu Mu directly displayed the defensive sword technique, immovable as a mountain, and easily withstood the impact of the flame spiral thunder wave sword technique without any damage. Zhong Mukin could only sheathe his sword and shake his head with a wry smile. I thought that my strength had improved and I was no match for you. At least I could make you more serious. I didn't expect that even though I have improved, you have improved even more. The gap between us is even more obvious. The comprehension of the fortune's secret domain has been of great help to me. Chu Mu said, I see that senior brother Zhong's sword control technique is still a little shaky. I'm afraid that you have just started practicing it. Yes. Zhong Mukin nodded. 2 months ago, I successfully comprehended the sword control technique. After 2 months of cultivation, I can finally display it. But to use it in actual combat, there are still many shortcomings. If senior brother Zhong doesn't mind, you can exchange pointers with me before I go into closed-door cultivation, Chu Mu said. Zhong Mukin was immediately overjoyed. Chu Mu also took the opportunity to share some of his insights on the cultivation of the sword control technique. Zhong Mukin quickly noted it down and planned to give it a try when he returned. After Zhong Mukin left, Chu Mu did not have time to rest. Immediately, someone came to find Chu Mu and told Chu Mu that the pavilion elders wanted to see him. Chu Mu secretly thanked himself for his hard work and left the soaring sky courtyard for the pavilion elders' courtyard. As soon as he entered the pavilion elders' courtyard, several pavilion elders immediately came out to greet Chu Mu. Chu Mu was overwhelmed by the favor. Chu Mu, you're finally back. The few pavilion elders who came out to greet him said with a smile. They looked at Chu Mu from head to toe as if to see if Chu Mu was unharmed. The current Chu Mu was the treasure of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. If it weren't for the fact that the Flying Heaven Pavilion had always advocated allowing their disciples to develop freely, they would have already summoned Chu Mu back and trained him in secret. In fact, it wasn't that no pavilion elder had suggested this, but after some discussion, they had finally dismissed the idea. As the several pavilion elders entered the hall of the pavilion elders' courtyard, the great pavilion elder and the other pavilion elders were all present. When they saw Chu Mu, they all revealed excited expressions. The first good fortune disciple, ha 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 ha! The great pavilion elder laughed heartily. When he had given the good fortune token to Chu Mu, he had only hoped that Chu Mu could enter the top 10 of the good fortune heavenly tablet. Moreover, this time's meditation on the good fortune heavenly platform was different from 100 years ago. There were foreign swordsmen participating. The crown prince of the true dragon dynasty from the Grand Chaos region, Long Zun, had an early 9th Revolution sword intent. His talent was unparalleled, so no one was surprised that he had become the first good fortune disciple. However, in the end, it was Chu Mu who had become the first good fortune disciple. This had shocked everyone. With you becoming the first good fortune disciple, the prestige of our flying heaven pavilion has risen. We have the momentum to surpass the other 4 great forces, the second pavilion elder said. The reason I was able to enter the good fortune heavenly platform was all because the pavilion elders gave me a good fortune token, Chu Mu said. You have now comprehended the mysteries of good fortune. For you, breaking through to the good fortune realm is just a matter of cultivating talent. The great pavilion elder pondered for a moment. Improving your cultivation talent is a difficult problem, but we have already made some progress. I believe that within a few years, we will be able to obtain some rare treasures to raise your cultivation talent from the 5th grade to the 4th grade. Chu Mu thought for a moment and then said, Pavilion elders, this time I went out adventuring and had a fortuitous encounter. My cultivation talent has risen from the 5th grade to the 4th grade. What? The pavilion elders were shocked. Even the great pavilion elder stood up. What did you just say? Your cultivation talent has risen from the 5th grade to the 4th grade. The pavilion elders spoke one by one. Their breathing was rapid, and their voices rose and fell. Their eyes were wide open as they stared at Chu Mu, waiting for Chu Mu's reply. Yes. Chu Mu nodded and said in an extremely confident tone. The pavilion elders' lips and bodies trembled. It took them a while to calm down. It seems that your luck is extraordinary. The great pavilion elder looked at Chu Mu with deep eyes as if he wanted to see through Chu Mu. He said, Now you can break through to the good fortune realm at any time and transform your ultimacy into the power of rules. You can become the sword of Gojoseon. Since Chu Mu's cultivation talent has risen to the 4th grade, then the rare treasures we are looking for must be changed. It would be best if they can be raised to the 3rd grade. Raising your cultivation talent from the 4th grade to the 3rd grade is many times more difficult than raising it from the 5th grade to the 4th grade. It is hard to say whether we can find it. No matter what, do your best to find it. The great pavilion elder said in an extremely firm tone. Then, he looked at Chu Mu and said, Chu Mu, what help do you need? As long as it is something the Flying Heaven Pavilion can do. I want to read some ancient books. Chu Mu thought for a while and said. The Flying Heaven Pavilion also had a place to store ancient books, but they could not be read casually. Some of the precious ancient books had to be paid enough fairy points. Read the ancient books? The great pavilion elder was stunned. He did not expect Chu Mu to make such a request. He immediately reacted and said, Yes, you have one honor for the Flying Heaven Pavilion. You can also enjoy some privileges. From now on, you can read the ancient books collected by the Flying Heaven Pavilion at will. Although the other pavilion elders were surprised by what the great pavilion elder said, no one objected. In addition, because you have comprehended the mystery of fortune, you will be rewarded with 5,000 fairy points. The great pavilion elder added. Chu Mu was pleasantly surprised. Whether it was the privilege to read the ancient books collected by the Flying Heaven Pavilion at will or the reward of 5,000 fairy points, both were very useful to Chu Mu. Thank you, Pavilion Elder. Chu Mu saluted with his sword. I look forward to your growth. I also look forward to the birth of a powerful sword of Gojoseon in our Flying Heaven Pavilion. The great Pavilion Elder nodded and said, As for improving your cultivation talent, no matter how difficult it is, we will do our best to find it and improve your cultivation talent again so that you can cultivate to a higher realm. After that, there was nothing else to do. Chu Mu bid farewell to the pavilion elders and went to the Flying Heaven Pavilion's Ancient Book Collection courtyard to read the Ancient Book. Chapter 986. There were many books in the Flying Heaven Pavilion's book collection courtyard. These books included astronomy, geography, knowledge of foreign lands, rare treasures, and so on. In short, these books had nothing to do with cultivation techniques and so on. However, they could increase one's knowledge and experience, as well as increase one's accumulation and foundation. Knowledge was always a hidden power that could not be underestimated. To use an analogy, in the land of 5 elements, those who had sufficient understanding of the land of 5 elements would often be able to discover more value. On the other hand, those who did not understand the land of 5 elements would purely rely on luck. There were many books in the book collection courtyard. If one wanted to read all of them, it would take at least a few decades. Chu Mu could not possibly spend so much time here. Although he wanted to, he did not have the time. He could only choose what he urgently wanted to know. Fortunately, although there were many books in the book collection courtyard, they were also categorized. There were also introductions and so on, making it easier to find. The Flying Heaven Pavilion had stood for many years. One could imagine the number of books in the book collection courtyard. Chu Mu spent a full hour before he found the books related to the land of 5 elements. He took out the books and opened them in the book collection courtyard. Chu Mu read very carefully and memorized the contents without missing a word. Strictly speaking, the land of 5 elements did not belong to the West Tiger territory. It belonged to the Archean world. Usually, the land of 5 elements was hidden in the void of the Archean world. It absorbed the power of 5 elements from the void. When the barrier of the land of 5 elements collided with the barrier of the Archean world to a certain extent, it would appear in that territory. For the past few thousand years, the land of 5 elements had been hidden in the void of the West Tiger territory. It moved slowly. Therefore, it appeared many times within the territory of the West Tiger territory. That was why it was recognized as belonging to the West Tiger territory. Because the land of 5 elements only absorbed the power of 5 elements, it only contained the power of 5 elements and the aura of the 5 elements. Everything was directly related to the 5 elements. Within the 5 elements domain, the power of the 5 elements would become very active and increase by at least 30%, while the other powers would be weakened by at least 10% and at most 30%. If one were to comprehend the power of the 5 elements in the land of 5 elements, the efficiency would be several times higher than in the outside world. Of course, it was obviously unrealistic to comprehend the power of the 5 elements in the land of 5 elements, because each appearance of the land of 5 elements was about 3 months. It was very short. Even if the efficiency of comprehension was several times higher than in the outside world, it would only be equivalent to 2 or 3 years of comprehension in the outside world. Moreover, the purpose of entering the land of 5 elements was for the spirit herbs, spirit ores, and other treasures of the 5 elements. There was simply no time to comprehend the power of the 5 elements. If he had stayed in the land of 5 elements, he would have been able to comprehend it for a long time. However, the problem was that once the land of 5 elements was hidden in the void, it would encounter all kinds of terrible forces from the void storm. Even the powerful sword of Gojoseon would not be able to withstand it and would die directly. As he flipped through the books, his understanding of the land of 5 elements gradually deepened. As he continued to flip through the books, Chu Mu came to the records of the land of 5 elements. The land of 5 elements was formed when the power of the 5 elements in the land of 5 elements continuously absorbed the chi of the 5 elements for more than 10,000 years. Finally, it took shape and continued to absorb the power of the 5 elements to grow. For example, the land of 5 elements that Chu Mu had seen in the land of 5 elements had existed for who knew how many tens of thousands of years. According to the books, when the power of the land of 5 elements had accumulated to a certain extent, it would naturally give birth to a 5-element sacred tree, and that 5 elements sacred tree would also grow a 5 elements sacred fruit. Once the 5 elements sacred fruit matured, it would possess incredible power. A matured 5 elements sacred fruit could be consumed directly, or it could be combined with other precious spiritual herbs to refine a 5 elements sacred pill. However, to refine a 5 elements sacred pill, one had to be at least an alchemy Saint Master's alchemy attainments, and there was no guarantee of success. The higher one's alchemy attainments were, the higher the chance of success. After refining a 5 elements sacred pill, the effect of the 5 elements sacred fruit would naturally increase exponentially. However, due to the high difficulty of refining and the fact that it could be consumed directly, the person who obtained the 5 elements sacred fruit had 2 choices. There was a requirement to consume the 5 elements sacred fruit. One had to be in the creation realm. After comprehending the laws, the fruit's effect was that after consuming it, one could directly comprehend the power of the 5 elements rule and increase the level of the power of the 5 elements rule. For example, a swordsman who had not comprehended the power of the 5 elements rule could comprehend the power of the 5 elements rule in a very short time after consuming the 5 elements sacred fruit. If one had already comprehended 1 or 2 of the 5 elements rule, one could quickly comprehend the rest after consuming the fruit. Moreover, for a period of time, the power of the 5 elements rule would increase in level until the power of the 5 elements sacred fruit was exhausted. This effect alone was amazing. However, it was not all. After consuming the 5 elements sacred fruit, there was still a chance to comprehend the 5 elements sword skill. The real 5 elements sword skill was not the same as the 5 elements sword skill that the 5 elements war emperor had used. Although the real 5 elements sword skill was composed of the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire and earth, its power far exceeded that of a 5 elements sword skill. It had reached a higher level. If the 5 elements war emperor had been able to display the real 5 elements sword skill, even the 5 unique of the West Tiger would not have been a match for him. Although the 5 elements sacred fruit is good, it is not meant for me. I'd better check the 5 elements sign, Chu Mu thought to himself. As he continued to flip through the books, Chu Mu finally found a more detailed record of the 5 elements sign. After the 5 elements sacred fruit was born, only the origin of the 5 elements sign was left. As long as the origin was there, it would slowly recover and grow stronger by absorbing the power of the 5 elements. The 5 elements sign had their own characteristic. After obtaining the origin of the 5 elements sign, one could refine it and integrate it into the body. Refining the origin of metal could make one's attacks sharper, capable of cutting through anything. Its sharpness could even harm one's spiritual world. Refining the origin of wood could make one's life force stronger, greatly increasing one's lifespan and giving one an amazing self-healing ability. Refining the origin of water could make one's body as flexible as water, full of toughness. Any attack that landed on it would be greatly weakened, and it would also give one a certain degree of self-healing ability. Refining the origin of fire could give one the ability to explode like flames. Every attack would be accompanied by terrifying heat and explosive power, causing extremely terrifying damage and burning to ashes. Refining the origin of earth could give one a huge boost in strength, making one's attacks heavier like mountains. Moreover, because of the origin of earth, one's body would have an amazing defensive ability, able to withstand powerful attacks without breaking. In short, each origin of the 5 elements sign had an incredible ability. After refining it for one's own use, it would make one's body even stronger. This book also recorded the method to refine the origin of the 5 elements signs. It didn't seem difficult. The difficult part was obtaining the origin of the 5 elements. According to reason, in the entire ancient world, there were more than just a few origin of the 5 elements signs. There were definitely more, but they were very few. Furthermore, obtaining them wasn't easy. After obtaining the information he wanted, Chu Mu left the book collection courtyard and quickly returned to the Skysoar courtyard. He entered his own stone pavilion and began his seclusion. His goal was to refine the origin of wood. From his spatial ring, he took out a foot-tall sapling. It emitted a dense and lively life force and immediately made Chu Mu feel extremely comfortable. It was as if his entire body was soaked in life force. It was warm and indescribably comfortable. After waking up, Chu Mu forced out a drop of essence blood from his body. His spiritual sense fused with this drop of essence blood, constantly permeating it and fusing with it. Then, this drop of essence blood dripped onto the origin of wood. It flowed and spread throughout the sapling, from the top to the bottom, from the leaves to the branches, and then converged to the main trunk, all the way to the root. Then, under the urging of Chu Mu's tyrannical spiritual sense, the essence blood seeped into the origin of wood bit by bit. This was a difficult process. The process of refining the origin of wood didn't require any special hand seals, nor did it require any special incantations. It just needed to fuse the essence blood with spiritual sense. But during the process, it would encounter resistance from the origin of wood. This was the origin of wood. Although it didn't have consciousness or intelligence, it had a trace of instinct. It was resisting Chu Mu's spiritual sense and essence blood. It seemed to understand that once Chu Mu's essence blood and spiritual sense seeped into it, it would become Chu Mu's vassal. It would no longer be able to maintain its independence. If it remained independent and continued to absorb wood element energy, after a long period of time, it would continue to grow. It would be like before, gaining intelligence and consciousness. In the end, it might even become an independent and unique life form that existed in the ancient age. The origin of wood's instinct was resisting Chu Mu's spiritual sense and essence blood. There were records of this in the books, so Chu Mu was mentally prepared from the beginning. He was prepared to fight against the origin of wood's instinct for a long period of time. Time passed bit by bit. In the end, Chu Mu's spiritual sense was stronger. Under his efforts, the essence blood that permeated the surface of the origin of wood slowly seeped in. More than half of it had already seeped into the origin of wood. Every time a trace of essence blood seeped in, the origin of wood's resistance would weaken a little. Under this situation, Chu Mu's efficiency of refining the origin of wood was constantly increasing. When the last trace of essence blood seeped into the origin of wood trembled slightly. A blood-red color flashed, and it returned to its original color. Chu Mu had a feeling that there was a deeper connection between him and the origin of wood, as if it had been separated from his body. With a thought, the origin of wood turned into a green light. It circled around Chu Mu once before shooting towards Chu Mu's chest, where his heart was. In the blink of an eye, it merged into Chu Mu's body. Chapter 987. The more profound a swordsman's cultivation was, the longer their lifespan would be. Origin Realm Swordsman already had a lifespan of 1,000 years, Divine Condensation Realm Swordsman had a lifespan of 2,000 years, and Creation Realm Swordsman had a lifespan of 3,000 years, living even longer. After refining the aspect of wood fused with his body, turning into a tiny sprout that took root in his heart. The force of the heart sword stored in his heart was immediately absorbed by the aspect of wood, emptying it out. The aspect of wood trembled and emitted a faint, round, jade-green luster that covered his entire heart, causing it to be covered in a layer of translucent jade-green. Contrasting with the red, it gave off a demonic feeling. Vigorous vitality constantly poured into his heart. Then, as his heart beat rhythmically with power, it was like a pump being sent from his blood to his veins. It was like an endless river that washed through every part of his body, causing him to glow with vitality. Chu Mu immediately sensed that the vitality in his body had increased by several times. His vitality had increased tremendously, and the rate at which his body was aging had decreased by several times. Even if his lifespan had not broken through 10,000 years, it was close. What surprised him was that the aspect of wood had completely devoured the force of the heart sword. The force of the heart sword was a unique force cultivated from the heart sword secret manual. It did not have any attributes, but it was extremely special and wondrous. In the past, the force of the heart sword had been of great help to Chu Mu. However, the cultivation of the force of the heart sword was just too difficult. It had to be accumulated bit by bit without any external help. Gradually, it was unable to keep up with Chu Mu's rapid increase in strength and was unable to form an effective increase. This was also the reason why Chu Mu did not use Shadow Strike, Sword Heart's Shadow, or Heart Sword cleaving the sky in every battle. The force of the Heart Sword was just too little. It was not enough at all. Chu Mu had cultivated too much, but his time was limited. He had to make some choices and give up on certain things. The cultivation of the force of the heart sword was one of the things he gave up. Without cultivating, the power of the heart sword did not increase. It had always been entrenched in his heart, forming a layer of protection. Now that it had been devoured by the wood avatar, the life force of the wood avatar had increased slightly. The life force was also protecting Chu Mu's heart. The power of the heart sword could be considered valuable. Speaking of which, the heart sword's secret record was indeed a miraculous martial art. Unfortunately, Chu Mu had a lot of things to cultivate. His time was limited, so he had to make a choice. If he focused on the cultivation of the heart sword's secret record, his strength would definitely surpass many swordsmen of the same level. It would not be impossible for him to challenge swordsmen of a higher level. Chu Mu stretched lazily as he finished refining the wood aspect source. His bones crackled like beans being fried, and exuberant vitality seeped out from his body, dyeing the surrounding air with a layer of thriving vitality. Her sharp fingernails were like the edge of a sword. She cut open the skin of her palm, but before blood could be seen, a faint green color flashed past, and the skin that was cut open was as good as new. My self-healing ability has increased by at least 10 times, Chu Mu said in a low voice. Immediately, he raised his head and looked out of the stone pavilion with a deep gaze. He muttered to himself, "It's time to comprehend a 5th-grade sword skill." A 5th-grade sword skill was at least 10 times more powerful than a 4th-grade sword skill, but the difficulty of comprehending it was 100 times or 1,000 times more difficult. In the past, Chu Mu had no clue. On the trip to the land of 5 elements, he had occasionally gained something, but if he wanted to comprehend it, he did not know how many years it would take. At that time, his peers would have left him far behind. If he wanted to comprehend a 5th-grade sword skill as soon as possible, he would need external help in addition to his own gains. This external help was the Flying Sky Mural. 5,000 flying sky points meant that Chu Mu could comprehend it 10 times. Whether or not he could comprehend a 5th-grade sword skill after 10 tries, Chu Mu was not very confident, but he had to try his best. If it did not work, he could only give up temporarily and break through to the creation realm first. Ever since he comprehended the mystery of creation, even if he did not deliberately cultivate, his understanding and mastery of various ultimacies had gradually improved. He had already reached the peak of each of his swordsmanship. If he made another breakthrough, just like the space ultimacy, he would reach a whole new level. He could break through to the creation realm at any time and transform the power of ultimacy into the power of rules. He got up and left the stone pavilion, heading to the mural palace. The junior brothers he met all stopped and saluted Chu Mu with their sword, showing the most sincere respect in their hearts. Then, they watched Chu Mu leave. The sudden feeling of being respected by everyone made Chu Mu feel a little helpless. He still preferred to be more easygoing. When he entered the mural palace again, there were dozens of Flying Heaven Pavilion disciples comprehending sword skills and sword skills. From the aura they emitted, Chu Mu knew that a portion of these disciples were experts at the level of the sword of Gojoseon. In other words, they were disciples of the Sky Breaking Academy. He walked towards the flying sky sword skill mural and found an empty spot to sit down cross-legged. He stared at the sword skill mural, and the distracting thoughts in his mind receded like the tide, leaving behind only emptiness. He began to comprehend the sword skill mural and the sword skills. The scratches on the swordsmanship murals were more complicated than those on the swordsmanship murals. This was because the scratches on the swordsmanship murals could be distinguished from each other if one looked carefully. Different sword skill scratches did not interfere with each other. But on the sword skill mural, the scratches were disorderly. They crisscrossed and overlapped with each other, forming an intricate pattern. Sword skills were originally more complicated than sword skills. They were the sublimation of sword skills. They were the fusion and use of all kinds of energy. They were exquisite to the peak, and they were powerful killing moves that fused with the energy of heaven and earth. Comprehending sword skills was even more difficult than comprehending sword skills. This was especially true for higher-grade sword skills. The difficulty would constantly increase. Comprehending the sword skill mural didn't mean that one could directly comprehend it as soon as they sat down. One had to first find a suitable spot. The scratches on the sword skill mural weren't completely complicated. At the very least, Chu Mu was gradually able to sort out the differences. These sword skill mural scratches existed in patches. Each patch was complete and each patch was very close to the other. That was why they looked like they overlapped with each other. Each sword skill mural represented a sword skill. If they were to be divided, these sword skill mural scratches were simple, which represented first-grade sword skills. The complexity and profoundness increased in order. First-grade sword skills, second-grade sword skills, third-grade sword skills, fourth-grade sword skills. Chu Mu also found the sword skill mural scratches of fifth-grade sword skills. Among them, first-grade sword skills had the most sword skill mural scratches. As the grade of the sword skill increased, the number of sword skill mural scratches gradually decreased. When it came to fifth-grade sword skills, there were very few sword skill mural scratches. Compared to the first-grade sword skill mural scratches, it was simply 1 in 100. Even among the many sword skill mural, Chu Mu also found a very complex sword skill mural. It was much more complex than the fifth-grade sword skill mural. It should be a sixth-grade sword skill mural. These sword skill mural did not contain the real sword skill, but the essence of the sword skill. Comprehending it, one could not directly comprehend a complete sword skill. One could only comprehend a trace of the sword skill's essence. Then, with one's own comprehension and ability, as well as one's own accumulation and repeated attempts, one could finally create a sword skill that was suitable for oneself. This was the purpose of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. It was also the reason why the Flying Heaven Pavilion paid the most attention to comprehension when recruiting disciples. For example, when disciples of other forces practiced sword skills and so on, in addition to their own comprehension and creation, they could also directly practice the sword skills left by their predecessors. Although they could also practice and improve their strength and become stronger, it was not as good as the sword skills that they created themselves. Of course, when comparing the two, there was no saying which one was better or more powerful. Everything depended on the swordsman's own ability. Chu Mu's comprehension was monstrous. He did not need to practice the sword skills left by his predecessors. What he needed was a kind of guidance to guide him forward and clear the fog to see the moon. The sword skills that were created by oneself were the most suitable sword skills for oneself. Chu Mu had always thought so. The swordsmen who were comprehending did not make a sound to disturb others. Even if they had finished comprehending, they would quietly stand up and then quietly turn around and leave the mural palace. It was a serious crime to disturb others' comprehension. It might even cause an irreconcilable hatred. Only life and death could be separated. Chu Mu was completely immersed in comprehension. His eyes were fixed on a grade 5 sword skill mural without blinking. He did not even feel that his eyes were sore. The process of comprehension seemed to be very slow. It felt as if the passage of time had stopped. The wheel of time was no longer rotating, and the power of his mind was constantly being consumed. Suddenly, Chu Mu's body trembled slightly and he came out of his state of comprehension. He only felt dizzy and his eyes were sore. Tears seeped out from the corners of his eyes and his eyes were bloodshot. He sighed and stood up. He turned around and left the mural palace drowsily. After a day of comprehension, he did not manage to comprehend anything. As expected, Chu Mu did not feel disappointed. After leaving the mural palace, he returned to the stone pavilion. First, he recovered his mind. Then, he recalled the process of comprehension. Although he did not gain anything, Chu Mu still habitually verified what he had seen in the land of 5 elements. A few days later, Chu Mu moved again. He went to the mural palace and sat in front of the sword skill mural to comprehend the grade 5 sword skill sword scar. He comprehended until his power of mind was exhausted. Once again, he felt dizzy and left. He returned to the stone pavilion to recover. Then, he recalled and verified. A few days later, he came to the mural palace again and sat cross-legged in front of the sword skill mural to comprehend the grade 5 sword skill sword scar. Day after day, he comprehended again and again. Unknowingly, half of the flying points in Chu Mu's identity token had been consumed. In other words, he had entered the mural palace to comprehend the sword skill mural 5 times. Now it was the 6th time. The previous 5 times, he did not manage to comprehend anything. However, Chu Mu's confidence did not waver. He did not suffer any setbacks or feel discouraged. On the 6th attempt, when his mental strength was exhausted once more, a ripple appeared in Chu Mu's tired eyes. It was a smile. Chapter 988. My efforts were not in vain. I finally managed to comprehend a trace of the outline. Chu Mu thought to himself. He stood up and left. Even though his mind was exhausted and his head was dizzy, he couldn't help but feel joy in his heart. As usual, Chu Mu returned to the stone pavilion to recover his mental strength. After a few days, Chu Mu entered the mural's palace for the 7th time. The beginning was difficult, but after entering, he found a direction to move forward. He was no longer blind. The 7th time the effect was better than the 6th time. Even though it was only a slight increase, it still made Chu Mu happy. Dragging his tired body, he returned the 8th time, the 9th time, the 10th time. The flying points in Chu Mu's identity sword token were all used up. However, he didn't completely comprehend the grade 5 sword skill. There were still some things that he didn't understand. He still needed to continue comprehending. However, he didn't have any flying points left. It seems like I have to borrow some first, Chu Mu said helplessly. Borrowing flying points depended on who it was. It wasn't something that could be casually borrowed. Chu Mu went to find Zhong Mukin. How much do you need? Although surprised, Zhong Mukin didn't refuse. Instead, he asked straightforwardly. Since he had already comprehended the imperial sword technique, he focused on the cultivation of the imperial sword technique. At the very least, he wouldn't need to enter the mural's palace to comprehend the murals for a year or two. 1,000. Chu Mu said bluntly. 1,000 flying points could allow him to comprehend the murals 2 more times. Chu Mu estimated that he could comprehend the murals 2 more times. At that time, he could go into seclusion. Fortunately, it's only 1,000. Zhong Mukin let out a sigh of relief. Although he had been in Soaring Sky Academy for many years and had accumulated quite a bit of fairy points, he was still able to take out 1,000 points. If Chu Mu wanted more, such as 345,000 points, he wouldn't have it. Zhong Mukin took out his identity sword token and gave over 1,000 fairy points to Chu Mu. Chu Mu didn't say when he would return the fairy points, and Zhong Mukin didn't have any intention of asking Chu Mu to return the fairy points. Chu Mu wasn't in a hurry to leave after obtaining the 1,000 Skysoar points. Instead, he fought with Zhong Mukin. Zhong Mukin's attainments in the imperial sword technique had become more proficient, so Chu Mu shared some of his cultivation experiences for Zhong Mukin to comprehend. This was the 11th time he entered the Mural Palace. Once again, he tried to comprehend the grade 5 sword mark on the mural. In this world, there is a saying that good preparation leads to success. Although he gained nothing from the first 10 attempts, it was not a waste. At the very least, it allowed Chu Mu to gradually clarify his path and find the right direction. As for the 6th to 10th comprehension, it allowed Chu Mu to slowly comprehend the essence within. Now, in the 11th comprehension, he had combined the comprehensions from the first 10 comprehensions, allowing him to advance by leaps and bounds. After exhausting his mental strength, Chu Mu left the Mural Palace with a heart full of joy. He was finally convinced that if nothing unexpected happened, he would be able to comprehend the mural completely after one more attempt. A few days later, Chu Mu came to the Mural Palace once again. When his mental strength was exhausted, Chu Mu was incomparably happy. In his mind, he couldn't help but recall the essence of various grade 5 sword skills. There was no specific grade 5 sword skill, only the purest essence of grade 5 sword skills. Bringing along the essence of the grade 5 sword skills, Chu Mu returned to the stone pavilion to recover his mental strength. After recovering his mental strength, Chu Mu went into seclusion. In other words, before he came out of seclusion, no one was allowed to disturb him. After spending 6,000 fairy points and more than a month's time, he had finally comprehended the essence of the grade 5 sword skills. After comparing it with what he had seen in the Land of 5 Elements, he could begin to create his own grade 5 sword skills. In the stone pavilion, Chu Mu was in seclusion. He had cut off all communication with the outside world and was fully immersed in comprehending the sword skills. In the Land of 5 Elements, the silhouette of the 5 Elements War Emperor was condensed in Chu Mu's spiritual world. Every swing of the sword was clearly displayed. Chu Mu was using his amazing memory to clearly recreate the battle of the 5 Elements War Emperor. When the sword was slashed out, a pure golden light broke through the sky. The sharpness was earth-shattering, causing the world to lose its color. The space was as fragile as tofu. Metal gave birth to water, water gave birth to wood, wood gave birth to fire, fire gave birth to earth, and earth gave birth to metal. Under this cycle, the power of metal increased layer by layer, reaching an unimaginable level. The 5 elements reinforced and restrained each other. Under the suppression of each other, the power would be reduced. Under the enhancement of each other, the power would increase exponentially. Many people knew about this, but only a few could comprehend it and grasp it. It was extremely rare. Comprehension, control, power of control, and other conditions were indispensable. Chu Mu did not lack the power he had grasped. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, he had all of them. He did not lack comprehension either. He could be called a monster. Similarly, he did not lack control. His powerful soul energy allowed him to possess extraordinary divine sense. His pursuit and self-training had pushed his control of divine sense to the limit. His control had also reached the limit. When everything was ready, it was time to create a grade 5 sword skill. The 5 Elements War Emperor in his spiritual world was constantly slashing out with his sword. It was either a metal elemental attack, a fire elemental attack, a water elemental defense, or a wood elemental attack. Every time he comprehended it, his understanding and application of the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth deepened. Seclusion meant a long time. Chu Mu didn't know how long it would take for him to successfully create the outline of a grade 5 sword skill. Yes, the outline was his requirement. As long as he could create the outline, the next step would be to perfect it. This process usually took a long time and couldn't be rushed. Chu Mu's state of mind was steady. He wasn't arrogant or impatient, and he was progressing step by step. Day after day, He comprehended the 5 elements War Emperor's swordsmanship. Little by little, he verified the essence of the grade 5 sword skill from the murals in the palace. The 5 elements reinforce each other. Chu Mu had always grasped the key point, which was the 5 elements reinforce each other. His goal from the beginning was very clear, which was to create a grade 5 sword skill based on the power of the 5 elements. Of course, a sword skill based on the power of the 5 elements wasn't necessarily a grade 5 sword skill. The so-called grade 5 sword skill was the perfect combination of the power of the 5 elements. The power released was far above that of a grade 5 sword skill. As for whether it was comparable to a grade 6 sword skill or surpassed it, Chu Mu didn't know. Even if the 5 elements War Emperor was a giant formed by the combination of the 5 elements and possessed the power of the 5 elements, he couldn't perform a grade 5 sword skill, let alone a human. Of course, according to the records in the book, there was a possibility of comprehending a grade 5 sword skill after consuming the 5 elements sacred fruit. As for how big the possibility was, Chu Mu didn't know. It could be a bit or a little bit. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. Fortunately, Chu Mu didn't need to eat or drink. With the nourishment of the qi of heaven and earth, his body could be maintained at its peak. Especially after refining the origin of the wood image and integrating it into his body, the origin of the wood image was constantly absorbing the power of wood from the heaven and earth. Although the absorption was slight, it was continuous. It also constantly released a trace of vitality into his heart, which made the vitality of his heart flourish and improve. With the power of his heart, it was like a water pump. A trace of vitality was integrated into his blood and circulated throughout his body. Imperceptibly, his body was strengthened little by little. In this way, not only was Chu Mu's body always at its peak, but it was also constantly strengthening. In the long run, his body's strength would gradually increase and become more and more powerful. Realizing this, Chu Mu was very happy. The stronger his body was, the higher the frequency of the vibration of the mountain quake's strength. When his body was strong to a certain extent, the vibration frequency would also increase to a certain extent. At that time, he might be able to transform it into a higher level of the earthquake strength. After 3 months of continuous meditation, Chu Mu finally understood something. He stood up and unsheathed his sword. Holding the no-return sword in his hand, the sword reflected a cold brilliance like water. Chu Mu got into a starting position and activated the power of the 5 ultimacies with his divine thought. The 5 ultimacies were supported on the no-return sword with the undying sword intent as the foundation. Suddenly, the no-return sword flashed with a myriad of colors. He controlled the contact between the gold ultimacy and the water ultimacy. According to the principle of the 5 elements engendering each other, the gold ultimacy was integrated into the water ultimacy. Swordsmen all knew that the 5 elements engendered each other. Perhaps they had seen it with their own eyes. However, they didn't know how to do it. Chu Mu didn't know either. But after 3 months of meditation, he had gained something and was now putting it into practice. Gold engendered water. How did gold engender water? It was a mystery. However, Chu Mu succeeded. Although it was slow, the integration of the gold ultimacy into the water ultimacy made the water ultimacy even stronger. After that, the water ultimacy became the wood ultimacy. The water ultimacy could nourish the growth of the wood ultimacy. Under the engendering of the water ultimacy, the wood ultimacy was like a sapling, growing strong and healthy. The wood ultimacy could generate fire. It was like adding oil to the fire. Instantly, the power of the fire ultimacy increased tremendously. After the fire, it was scorched earth. Therefore, the fire ultimacy gave birth to the earth. The earth ultimacy gave birth to gold. When Chu Mu completed the process of gold engendering water, water engendering wood, wood engendering fire, fire engendering earth, and earth engendering gold, it took him 15 minutes. He couldn't help but shake his head. Too slow. If I use 15 minutes to execute a sword skill, I would have been killed countless times. He muttered to himself and started cultivating again. The most important thing now was to increase the speed of the 5 elements engendering each other. Only by achieving the engendering of the 5 elements in a few breaths or even an instant would he be able to do it. He worked hard and cultivated slowly without stopping. Day after day, month after month, the efficiency of the 5 elements engendering each other gradually increased. Chu-Mu also tried to integrate the sword intent into the sword after the 5 elements engendering each other. The power was indeed much stronger than a 4th-grade sword skill. Moreover, this 5th-grade sword skill was still in its infancy. As it was perfected, the power of the sword skill could continue to increase and become even stronger. Chapter 989. The microcosm of the Flying Heaven Pavilion also had its seasons. Half a year ago, the sun was shining brightly. Now it was snowing all over the sky. On this snowy day, Chu-Mu came out of his closed-door training. After half a year of closed-door training to comprehend the 5th-grade sword technique, I finally created the prototype of the 5th-grade sword technique. The next step is to gradually perfect it. Walking out of the stone pavilion and strolling in the white snow, Chu-Mu thought to himself, "It's just that it's harder to perfect a 5th-grade sword technique than a 4th-grade sword technique. Without a suitable opponent, I don't know how long it will take." Even if it was just a preliminary stage, the power of a 5th-grade sword technique was much stronger than that of a 4th-grade sword technique. While thinking, Chu-Mu's footsteps did not stop. Snow fell from the sky like white fairies dancing between heaven and earth, cold and elegant. He let the snow fall on his shoulders and body in silence. It was as if he was the only one left in the whole world, aloof from the world. His mind was clear of all distracting thoughts. He drew his sword and danced in the sky filled with flying snow. The sword was like flying flowers and flying snow, connecting into one. Chu-Mu's consciousness was in a strange state. It was not a basic sword technique, nor was it the 5 elements sword technique, nor was it the wind and thunder sword technique, nor was it the cloud sword technique, nor was it the ice sword technique, nor was it the sky sword technique. It looked like a chaotic and disorderly sword technique. It was easy and untraceable. If there was a bystander, they would definitely not know what the next sword technique would be, because even Chu-Mu himself did not know. The sword light seemed to merge with the snowflakes falling from the sky. It was as if Chu-Mu was not wielding a sword, but snow. Suddenly, his hand paused. The sword light instantly crushed the snowflakes within a radius of 10 feet, forming a vacuum. A terrifying whistling sound rang out, and the airflow reversed, like a long river flowing backward. Endless snowflakes gathered together with the reversed airflow, filling up the vacuum and wrapping Chu-Mu's body into a huge snowball. The snowball instantly shrank and exploded, turning into snowflakes. Each snowflake was like a sword ray, extremely sharp and fierce. They shot out and covered an area of 1,000 meters, causing all the falling snowflakes to shatter. Once again, the area became like a vacuum. Sheathing his sword, Chu-Mu regained his consciousness. After examining himself, he swung his sword again. He found that his swordsmanship had improved further, reaching the level of a half-step god. This was a clear improvement. He had been working hard for a long time, but he hadn't been able to achieve it. He didn't expect that he would be able to achieve it in a single moment of enlightenment. Senior Brother Chu's swordsmanship has become even more brilliant. A light voice came through the fluttering snowflakes with a hint of coldness. Senior Martial Brother Zhong. The person who came was Zhong Mukan. Chu-Mu also shouted. They had not seen each other for half a year, and the aura exuding from Zhong Mukan's body was even sharper than before. Chu-Mu was improving, and so was Zhong Mukan. Of course, Chu-Mu's improvement was more obvious than his. Senior Martial Brother Chu, while you were in seclusion for half a year, something big happened in the Flying Heaven Pavilion. Zhongmukin walked in front of Chu Mu and said with a faint smile, "What is it? If it could be called something big, it must be extraordinary." Chu Mu was also a little curious. Song Mo, Lu Yi, and the others went to the creation platform with you to comprehend the mysteries of creation. 6 of them went into seclusion after returning to the Flying Heaven Pavilion. Now they have all broken through and reached the creation realm, becoming the sword of Gojoseon, Zhongmukin said. Chu Mu was stunned at first, but he quickly reacted. This was something he had expected. The 6 people who had broken through to the creation realm should beat Song Mo, Lu Yi, Wang Wei, Sun Yuan, and the others. Fang Qingtian and the other 2 new disciples were training outside like Chu Mu. They should be planning to increase their accumulations and increase their potential to the maximum before going into seclusion to break through. To them, they had already comprehended the mysteries of creation. It was much easier for them to break through to the creation realm compared to other swordsmen. However, the news of Song Mo and the others breaking through to the creation realm stimulated Chu Mu. It made his originally hesitant thoughts become firm. After chatting with Zhongmukin for a while, Chu Mu turned and left, returning to the stone tower. He planned to go into seclusion again. This time, it was not for sword skills, but to break through to the creation realm. Originally, Chu Mu was still hesitating whether to perfect the grade 5 sword skill before breaking through to the creation realm, or to perfect the grade 5 sword skill after breaking through to the creation realm. Both of them had their disadvantages, but they also had their advantages. The advantage of the former was that once he perfected the grade 5 sword skill and broke through to the creation realm, he could turn the human tier grade 5 sword skill into an earth tier grade 5 sword skill in a relatively short amount of time. The disadvantage was that he could not be sure how long it would take to perfect the grade 5 sword skill. It might take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or even longer. When he thought about the grade 4 sword skills he had perfected, he had spent half a year or even a year to perfect them after a lot of actual battles. Grade 5 sword skills were much more complicated than grade 4 sword skills, and the difficulty of perfecting them was much higher. The latter could allow him to break through to the creation realm in a short amount of time. At that time, he would become the sword of Gojoseon, and his strength would increase greatly. However, if he wanted to perfect the grade 5 sword skill, he would need to spend even more time to slowly perfect it. There were advantages and disadvantages. Between the two, Chu Mu made his choice. He chose the latter and broke through to the creation realm. The stage below the creation realm was still too small. Once he reached the creation realm, he could be considered to have truly stepped onto the stage of the ancient world's expert. That was just the beginning. He began his seclusion and took out a large amount of high-grade origin crystals. There were more than 1 million of them, and they were scattered all around him, piling up like a mountain. He regulated his breathing, causing his essence, qi, and spirit to reach their peak. Then, the mystery of creation that he had comprehended appeared in Chu Mu's mind. He could only feel that the space around him seemed to have undergone some strange changes. Everything became extremely clear, and there was a deeper fluctuation between heaven and earth. The truth was presented before his eyes. The mystery of creation, the creation realm. Sword practitioners who had not comprehended the mystery of creation would usually have to comprehend what creation was before they could break through to the creation realm. What was creation? It could only be understood and could not be explained with words. Chu Mu had already comprehended the mystery of creation a long time ago. After settling down for a period of time, he was even more familiar with it. Therefore, after he regulated his breathing, he quickly entered the state of breaking through. The breakthrough from the divine condensation realm to the creation realm was a kind of qualitative improvement. It was a double upgrade of the spiritual plane and the body. At the beginning of the breakthrough, Chu Mu's divine sense power was the first to undergo changes. It constantly became purer, and its quantity was also clearly increasing. The sword's soul was also affected, and underwent a qualitative change. Immediately after, the breakthrough of his body also began. Under the impact of the endless vitality of the wood phase origin, it rapidly grew stronger. The infinite desolate sword essence in his dantian also began to operate at a high speed. It was extremely fast, constantly absorbing the yuan qi of the world from the outside world, and constantly compressing and condensing it. A large amount of yuan qi of the world dispersed from the millions of high-grade origin crystals, forming streams of white air current. They emitted a whistling sound, and like numerous spirit snakes, they shot towards Chu Mu. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into Chu Mu's body. The millions of high-grade origin crystals shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. The origin crystals were the crystallization of the yuan qi of the world. The higher the quality of the origin crystal, the more yuan qi of the world it contained, and the purer it was. The low-grade origin crystal contained 1/10 of the impurities, the mid-grade origin crystal contained 1/100th of the impurities, the upper-grade origin crystal contained 1/1000th of the impurities, and the highest-grade origin crystal contained 1/10,000th of the impurities. If the highest-grade origin crystal was purified into origin liquid, there would not be a trace of impurities. If not for the seal on the stone tower, Chu Mu's breakthrough would have caused such a huge commotion that it would definitely have affected the outside world. A large amount of yuan qi of the world poured into Chu Mu's body, and the infinite desolate sword essence madly operated, emitting a fierce roar. It was like a tsunami, capable of toppling mountains and overturning seas. It constantly absorbed the pure yuan qi of the world, and transformed it into its own power. While increasing the quantity, it also constantly condensed and became purer under the great circulation. The sword essence of the creation realm compared to the sword essence of the divine condensation realm was not only an increase in quantity, but also a qualitative improvement. The improvement of the sword essence, the improvement of the power of the divine sense, and the improvement of both the body and the mind. The indescribable feeling made Chu Mu feel extremely comfortable. Unknowingly, his understanding of the mysteries of the creation realm deepened little by little. Suddenly, Chu Mu felt his entire body shake, and his mind also shook. The sword essence of the divine sense exploded in an instant, turning back into the power of the divine sense. It was incomparably majestic, like a vast ocean, surging and ebbing like the tides. This kind of divine sense was more than twice as powerful as when he was at the peak of the divine condensation realm. Immediately, a whirlpool appeared in the center of the vast ocean formed by the divine sense. It spun at a high speed, constantly absorbing the divine sense from all directions. At the bottom of the whirlpool, something slowly appeared. This was a spontaneous process, and it did not require Chu Mu to deliberately control it. It took shape naturally. A new sword essence of the divine sense was formed. This new sword essence of the divine sense was more solid, and the power of the divine sense it contained was more powerful, reaching an astonishing level. The sword essence had become a king sword essence, and the sword essence in the sword essence had naturally become a king sword essence. The millions of high-grade yuanjing in the outside world all turned into a pile of fine black powder, scattering in the surroundings. These were the impurities contained within the yuanjing. Within Chu Mu's body, the infinite wasteland sword essence had completely changed. Its degree of condensation had increased by 2 times, and its quantity had also increased by 2 times. The strength and toughness of his body had also increased by more than 2 times. With every movement, a powerful force surged within his body, surging through his limbs. So the difference between the creation realm and the peak of the divine condensation realm is so obvious, Chu Mu thought to himself as he felt the power in his body. Previously, he was able to kill a low-level sword of Gojoseon. Now that he thought about it, it was really incredible. No wonder it was said that if one was not a sword of Gojoseon, one would not be a match for a sword of Gojoseon. That was almost an iron law. Chu-Mu was able to break that iron law not only because of his extraordinary fighting skills, but also because of the divine wasteland sword technique, the peak of the 9 revolutions sword essence, and the peak of the 9 revolutions profound. The feeling of the creation realm is really wonderful. Stretching his muscles and bones, Chu-Mu stood up. Now, even if he did not need to concentrate, he could still clearly feel the fluctuations of the various powers that filled the world. He could even better capture the trajectories of the various powers. Chapter 990. Snow filled the sky and fell from the sky. The small world of the flying heaven pavilion was wrapped in silver and covered in snow. A silhouette broke through the air and flew out of the building in the stone. It was so fast that it disappeared in the blink of an eye. Then, a terrifying sonic boom sounded, tearing apart the endless flying snow and turning it into white dust. He did not hold back at all and flew in the sky without any scruples. He was so fast that he felt satisfied. The feeling of being as fast as lightning made him feel comfortable all over. He was flying in the sky instead of riding on a sword. After breaking through to the blessed realm, he came into contact with a deeper level of the power of the world. Naturally, he had the ability to fly in the sky because the binding force of the world was no longer as obvious on him. He was like a comet, dragging a long flaming tail as he cut through the sky. After flying a few rounds around the valley of the soaring sky court, he returned to the stone pavilion. My flying speed is more than twice as fast as when I was riding on a sword. If I use the sword control technique, my speed will increase by a lot and become even faster. Chu-Mu was secretly excited in the stone pavilion. Speed was also a part of one's strength. The faster he was, the more effective it would be for him to escape or pursue. Before entering the blessed realm, he would never understand the subtleties of this. Once he entered the blessed realm, he would understand. Chu-Mu did not regret his choice at all. His eyes could see the faintly discernible trajectories between heaven and earth. Some of these trajectories were red, some were gold, and some were blue. They were all different and very complicated. However, Chu-Mu only had a slight sense of closeness to the trajectories of 10 colors. That was because he had comprehended 10 types of profound meanings, and they just happened to correspond to the trajectories of those 10 colors. Breaking through to the blessed realm did not mean that Chu-Mu had become a sword of Gojoseon, because breaking through to the blessed realm was just a starting point for him to become a sword of Gojoseon. Next, he needed to transform at least one of his profound meanings into the power of rules. Only then could he truly become a powerful sword of Gojoseon and step onto a broader stage. No one knew that Chu-Mu had broken through, and no one knew that Chu-Mu was cultivating wholeheartedly at this moment. He was trying his best to connect with the trajectory of heaven and earth to transform his power Upanishad. In fact, strictly speaking, it was not easy to transform the power of profundity into the power of the natural order, even if one advanced to the creation realm. It would take a certain amount of time. Talented swordsmen could transform their profound force into principal force in a short period of time. It might take a few days, but those with average talent would need a longer time. It might take 10 days, dozens of days, or even a few months. Moreover, this referred to the transformation of the first profound into the power of the natural order. The difficulty of transforming the second profound into the power of the natural order was 5 times higher than the first. In other words, under average circumstances, it would take around a month for a swordsman to transform the first type of profundity into the power of laws, and it would take over 5 months to transform the second type of profundity into the power of laws. For the third type of profundity to transform into the power of laws, it would take at least 25 months, which would be 2 years and 1 month. Based on this calculation, it would take 10 years and 5 months for the fourth type of profundity to transform into the power of laws. For the fifth type of profundity to transform into the power of laws, it would take 52 years and 1 month. For the sixth type of profundity to transform into the power of laws, it would take 210 years and 5 months. The seventh type of profundity, the eighth type of profundity, the ninth type of profundity, the 10th type of profundity, based on the average speed, if Chu-Mu wanted to transform all 10 types of profundity into the power of laws, it would take him as long as his lifespan was exhausted. Of course, Chu-Mu's talent was extremely high. It would definitely take him less than a month to transform the first type of profundity into the power of laws. Moreover, there were also some elixirs or cultivation sacred grounds that could shorten the time needed for profundity to transform into the power of laws. For example, the 5 elemental spiritual herbs that Chu-Mu obtained in the 5 elemental land could be refined into the corresponding 5 elemental spiritual pills. As long as he transformed the first type of profundity into the power of laws, he would become the sword of Gojoseon and possess the ability to withstand those 5 elemental spiritual pills. He would then be able to refine a large number of 5 elemental spiritual pills to aid his cultivation. The power of laws was different from profundity. When the concept was promoted to profundity, the profundity would be at the initial level. It required the swordsman to continue to deepen his comprehension and improve it bit by bit, from beginner to minor success, and then to perfection in Deshang's case. After that, it still needed to be tempered until the profundity was refined to the limit that the soul could withstand. The power of laws was theoretically divided into 4 major levels. From low to high, they were human level, earth level, and heaven level. The last level was called God level. Within each level, there were 4 sublevels, namely low, middle, high, and top. This was the reason why there was a saying that a swordsman whose sword intent could not be refined to the 6th transformation level had almost no hope of becoming the sword of Gojoseon, because after the 6th transformation profundity transformed into the power of laws, it would be at the human level. If it was at the early 6th transformation level, it would be at the low level of the human level. If it was at the middle 6th transformation level, it would be at the middle level. If it was at the late 6th transformation level, it would be at the high level. As for the limit of the 6th transformation level, it would be at the top level. Similarly, after the 7th transformation profundity transformed, it would be at the earth level, and after the 8th transformation profundity transformed, it would be at the heaven level. As for the God level, it was more or less a legend, because it required the 9th transformation profundity. After mastering the power of laws, the level of the power of laws would not remain unchanged. Through continuous comprehension, the level of the power of laws could be improved. For example, the low level of the human level's power of laws could be gradually deepened and upgraded to the middle level of the human level's power of laws. However, it often took a long time. As for the top level of the human level's power of laws, it could be broken through the shackles and upgraded to the low level of the earth level's power of laws through continuous comprehension. However, this kind of upgrade was 10 times, dozens of times, or even 100 times more difficult than the upgrade between the small levels. Under normal circumstances, if a swordsman did not have any great opportunities, it would be difficult to achieve even after cultivating for decades or even centuries. Moreover, the lower the level of the power of laws, the faster the upgrade. The higher the level, the more difficult it would be to upgrade. Sometimes one would be stuck at a bottleneck and could not break through even after 1,000 years. Before the breakthrough, Chu-Mu had a theoretical understanding of the creation realm. He did not know how fast his profundity would transform into the power of laws, but he was sure that it would definitely not take a month. Because a month was only a theoretical time calculated by combining almost all the swordsman's talents. The more talented a person was, the shorter the time, and the more average a person was, the longer it would take. 1 month was considered average. Chu-Mu was not worried about the initial transformation from the profundity to the power of laws. What he was thinking about now was which profundity to transform first, because the first profundity to transform into the power of laws was the easiest. After that, the theoretical difficulty would increase by at least 5 times. Therefore, the choice was very important. Among the 10 profundities that I have mastered, the most powerful one is the void profundity, and the most mysterious one is also the void profundity. My understanding and mastery of the void profundity ranks second, and the one that I have the deepest understanding and mastery of is the wood profundity. In addition, the gold profundity ranks third, the wind profundity ranks fourth, and the thunder profundity ranks fifth. The water profundity is similar to the fire profundity and the earth profundity, while the cloud profundity and the ice profundity rank second. Although each profundity had surpassed the level of swordsmanship, there were still differences between them. The reason why the wood profundity ranked first was entirely due to the refinement and integration of the wood form origin. The void profundity ranked second because of the comprehension in the creation realm. The gold profundity ranked third because Chumu had previously focused on the gold profundity. The wind profundity ranked fourth because Chumu had first come into contact with the power of heaven and earth. If he did not think about it, he would naturally choose the wood profundity as the first power to transform into the power of laws. Chumu believed that it would definitely be very fast, or even complete the transformation within a day. However, if he thought about it deeply, that would be a wrong choice. If he chose the wood profundity to transform and set the time to 1 day, then the second profundity's transformation would not take 5 days, but more days. 5 times was only a theoretical increase under normal circumstances. The actual increase was related to the profundity itself. For example, if the first profundity was the wood profundity and the second profundity was the void profundity, then the increase would not only be 5 times, but it might even be 50 times. Thinking quickly, Chumu quickly calculated and analyzed the pros and cons. In the end, he decided to transform the void profundity into the void law first. He had his reasons for making such a choice. Firstly, the void profundity was the most mysterious and difficult of the 10 profundities. If it was not chosen as the first choice, the difficulty of the transformation would increase by at least 5 times. If it was put in the later stages, the transformation into the power of laws would be far in the future. Moreover, the elixirs that could assist the transformation of the void profundity were too rare and precious. Secondly, no matter what, Chumu could not transform the majority of the profundity into the power of laws in a short period of time. Therefore, he had to make the most optimal choice. Of course, he had to prioritize the profundity that he already had, and the stronger, the better. Thunderstorm, breaking clouds to see the blue sky, startling rainbow, immovable mountain, breaking clouds flash, void scar, 5 phases 5 wheels sword. Without a doubt, the 5th grade sword skill, 5 phases 5 wheels sword, was the most powerful, followed by void scar. However, the 5 phases 5 wheels sword was only in its infancy and could not be used in a real battle. Moreover, he had to transform all 5 profundities into the power of laws, then spend some time to master this sword skill, raise it from the human grade to the lower grade, and then perfect it. The time required was immeasurable. Void Scar only needed the void profundity, and the transformation only needed the void law. Although the difficulty was high, it should be easier than the 5 phases 5 wheels sword. The first profundity was the void law. Chapter 991. Inside the Soaring Sky Academy's 100 Battles Tower, 2 people were facing each other on the 100 Battles platform. They were Wang Wei and Sun Yuan. In the blink of an eye, the sword light exploded. It was like fire and lightning, swift and violent. An incomparably tyrannical energy was attached to the sword, causing the might of the sword to reach an extremely terrifying level. The spectating swordsmen below the battle stage were all dumbfounded. Sword shadows surged like waves, and the momentum was like thunder. Wang Wei and Sun Yuan were engaged in a fierce battle. So strong. The power of laws is really strong, murmured a Soaring Sky Academy disciple. This is my first time watching a sword of Gojoseon fight up close. The power of laws is so much stronger than the power of profundity. Wang Wei was ranked third in the Soaring Sky Academy, while Sun Yuan was ranked fourth. However, the difference in strength between the two wasn't that great. After an intense battle, Wang Wei emerged victorious. Of course, it wasn't a battle to the death. They had just made a breakthrough and consolidated their strength. They had the urge to test it out, so they came to the 100 Battles platform to test it out. However, they had just made a breakthrough to the sword of Gojoseon and consolidated their strength. They hadn't had the time to grasp their previous sword skills. They could only infuse their power of laws, sword intent, and sword origin into their swords to strengthen their swords. Wang Wei and Sun Yuan left the 100 Battles Tower under the respectful gazes of the Soaring Sky Academy disciples. I heard that Chu Mu has returned from his training. I'm thinking if I should go to the Soaring Sky Academy to look for him and let him experience the power of the sword of Gojoseon. Sun Yuan stroked his chin and chuckled. His eyes were shining. In fact, his thoughts were very simple. He wanted to show off. That's right, he wanted to show off. Whether it was losing to Chu Mu twice, or being defeated by Chu Mu in the Fortune Secret Realm, he was very unhappy. It was all because Chu Mu's cultivation talent was only at the 5th grade. It was impossible for him to break through to the Fortune Realm. Now that he had broken through to the Fortune Realm and successfully transformed 2 of his profundities into the power of laws, his strength had greatly increased. His confidence was soaring, and he wanted to get back at Sun Yuan. Right now, we are no longer on the same level as Chu Mu. Wang Wei glanced at Sun Yuan. How could he not have the same thought in his mind? It was just that his thoughts were more subtle. After thinking about it deeply, he felt that there was no need to do so. If you want to go, go by yourself. I'm just saying. Right now, we are indeed not on the same level as Chu Mu. Sun Yuan smiled. He also dispelled the idea of going to the Soaring Sky courtyard to look for Chu Mu to show off and suppress him. He suddenly felt that it would be very boring. However, if he met Chu Mu, he would like to see what kind of expression Chu Mu would have. Just thinking about it made him happy. Little did they know that Chu Mu had already broken through to the creation realm and had begun to transform the power of profundity into the power of laws. They also did not know that before this, Chu Mu had personally killed several Sword of Gojoseon experts, and one of them was even a high-grade Sword of Gojoseon. If they knew about this, they wouldn't be able to laugh now. Let's go. It's time to report to the heaven-shattering courtyard. Senior Brother Tsang and Senior Brother Lu are once again ahead of us. As Ichino Sword of Gojoseon, we can't let them be too far ahead of us, Wang Wei said. Inside the stone pavilion, a huge amount of divine sense was perfectly controlled. It captured the translucent silver threads between heaven and earth. That was the power of the law of space that existed between heaven and earth. The difficulty of capturing the power of laws was directly related to the strength of one's perception of the power of laws. For a profound power like the law of space, it was even more difficult to capture. Fortunately, Chu Mu's divine sense was many times stronger than other swordsmen of the same level. His comprehension of the law of space was also not weak. After continuous efforts, he finally captured the first trace of the law of space and guided it into his spiritual world, rushing toward the profundity of space. The process of transforming the profound power into the law of space was to use the law of space that existed between heaven and earth to guide it into the spiritual world. It was the process of tempering the profound power, causing it to undergo a qualitative change. Chu Mu's consciousness could see that the profound power of space in his spiritual world was being tempered by that trace of the law of space. It was changing little by little. However, the amount of the law of space was too little. It was far from enough. He continued to capture. Compared to the other laws of space, the amount of the law of space was much less. Therefore, Chumu had to spend more time. Bit by bit, it captured, guided, and refined. Little by little, the power of space profound began to change. Time passed slowly. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. The cultivation process of tempering the profound power into the law of space would not have any drawbacks even if it was disturbed. Moreover, Chumu's tower in the stone was sealed. Without his permission, no one could enter. Chumu was certain that if he had chosen the profundity of wood as his first choice, he would have become the sword of Gojoseon by now because the profundity of wood would have transformed into the law of wood. However, he had chosen the profundity of space. It was extremely difficult, and he had not completed it yet. Unknowingly, a month had passed. Chumu had captured another trace of the law of space, and guided it into his spiritual world to temper the profundity of space. When the trace of the law of space was completely consumed, the profundity of space in his spiritual world suddenly trembled. From beginning to end, a tyrannical yet ethereal energy flowed through. Amidst the fluctuations, the profundity of space seemed to have undergone a qualitative change, becoming the law of space. With a thought, Chumu used his divine telekinesis to control the transformed profundity of space and condensed it on his finger. Feeling the power contained within, Chumu was a little excited. Strong, very strong. It was 10 times stronger than the profundity of space. If I regain control of Space Scar, I can kill most Ichino Sword of Gojoseon in one strike. It's not impossible to kill a 2-star Sword of Gojoseon, Chumu thought to himself. Previously, when he faced Black Prison's ordinary Ichino Sword of Gojoseon, he had to use Deshang's Burning Blood transformation to increase his strength by several times. Only after combining a few sword skills could he kill the Ichino Sword of Gojoseon. Now, if he regained control of Space Scar and it became an Earth-rank Ichino Sword of Gojoseon, he wouldn't need to use Deshang's Burning Blood transformation or any other sword skills. Space Scar alone could kill most Ichino Sword of Gojoseon. With Space Scar's silent and extremely fast characteristics, killing a 2-star Sword of Gojoseon was not impossible. It could even pose a threat to the Samsung Sword of Gojoseon. The current me can barely be considered as an Ichino Sword of Gojoseon, Chumu muttered to himself. Sword hero, sword venerable, and now the Sword of Gojoseon. He was walking further and further on the path of the sword. The Sword of Gojoseon was divided into 9 stars. The evaluation method was very simple, it was based on cultivation. The full name of the creation realm was the 9 heavens of creation. Each heaven was equivalent to 1 star. Chumu had broken through to the creation realm. His current cultivation was considered to have just entered the first heaven of creation. He had mastered a type of rule power and could be considered as an Ichino Sword of Gojoseon. In theory, the difference in the power of the sword origin between each heaven of the 9 heavens of creation was 10 times. However, the actual situation was determined by the cultivation method of the swordsman. Some swordsmen's cultivation method was extremely profound, and their sword origin was denser and more powerful. Even if they were at the first heaven, there would still be differences. In other words, if they had mastered the same type of rule power, a 2-star Sword of Gojoseon would be 10 times more powerful than an Ichino Sword of Gojoseon. However, this was not the case in reality. The rule power that each swordsman had mastered was not necessarily the same, and the grade of the sword skills that they had mastered was not necessarily the same. However, under normal circumstances, a Sword of Gojoseon with a higher cultivation would definitely have a stronger attack power than a Sword of Gojoseon with a lower cultivation. A true genius could not be calculated according to common sense. After a month, he had successfully transformed the profound meaning of space into the law of space. What he needed to do next was to deepen his understanding and mastery of the law of space until he could master the sword skill, Space Scar. However, before that, Chu Mu still planned to transform some of the other profound meanings into the law of space. The second profound he chose was the profound of gold. The profound of gold was extremely sharp and was suitable for close combat. Chu Mu was also more comfortable with it. Moreover, the spatial energy would not be easily displayed in front of others unless it was a life and death battle. It was also a small hidden strength. Compared to the profound of space, the difficulty of refining the profound of gold was much lower. The tyrannical power of divine sense was constantly capturing the law of metal between heaven and earth. At a glance, the law of metal that filled the space was many times more than the law of space. He captured the law of metal bit by bit and guided it into his spiritual world to refine the profound of gold. The golden profound of gold that was filled with a sharp aura was undergoing a transformation little by little, and its sharpness was becoming stronger. After continuous refinement, the profound of gold trembled after 10 days of continuous refinement. Golden light circulated, and a tyrannical sharpness burst out, filling the spiritual world. The profound of gold had successfully transformed into the law of metal. According to the theory, Chu Mu did not choose the profound of space as his first profound, but other profound of water, profound of fire, and so on. The time needed to transform into the law of space should be 2 days. However, the transformation of the profound of void took a total of 30 days. 15 times the difficulty was extremely high. If the transformation of the profound of void was delayed, it was unknown how long it would take under the 15 times amplification. It would take an indefinite amount of time. The third profound of wind shall be the profound of wind. Chu Mu thought for a while and made his decision. He had his considerations. In a short period of time, he would not be able to remaster the movement and sword skill startling rainbow. Therefore, the law of wind was necessary. It could increase his speed in battle, and the law of metal was incomparably sharp. If the two were combined, the attack power would be even more tyrannical. Moreover, he had a sword skill called Wind Slasher, which was based on the power of both metal and wind. There were no surprises. In theory, the time needed for the profound of wind to transform into the law of wind was 50 days. 50 days was less than 2 months. Chu Mu could afford to wait. Sure enough, after 50 days, the profound of wind in his spiritual world transformed into the law of wind as he wished. From then on, Chu Mu possessed 3 laws of space. If he wanted to transform into the fourth, he would need 250 days, which was more than 8 months. While he was hesitating, Chu Mu suddenly realized that he still had 13 high-grade sand of time that he could use.